Episode 411, Reunion. Michael wasn't the least bit interested in their family matters. He simply went, we can talk about it more when I'm back. Michael opened the door. On his end, Brandon looked at the time. His sister's son was going to be there soon, so it was about time he ended the call with Michael. His subordinates were standing around him. The moment he put his cell phone back on the table, the door opened. Mrs. Bright, James, and Jack came in. Mr. Miller, here. Mrs. Bright made way for James to enter first. James and Jack walked in together. Ever since Tucker had his accident, James realized that he couldn't go on depending on Tucker for everything while bumbling about life himself. If he had been a little more vigilant or careful, if he had gone out with Tucker that day, perhaps Tucker wouldn't be in this state now. This is Brandon Hall. Mrs. Bright introduced Brandon to James while they were making their way in. James shook his hand as a form of greeting and respect. He appeared serious. James had been learning about the management system from Jack and had given up on the hard labor jobs at the construction sites. James's rate of learning exceeded Jack's expectations. Brandon quickly stood up while supporting himself on the table. The calmness he had tried to maintain while on the phone with Michael completely vanished. His eyes lit up as he looked at James.
Good, very good. This is your mom.
Brandon took a photo out of his pocket, which he had kept in the best condition possible. He looked at it for a moment before handing it to James.
She's very smart and also...
Brandon couldn't bring himself to go on. It was their first time meeting, but their kinship was real and undeniable. This was the first time James had received such treatment from an elder. He wasn't used to it and felt a little awkward, but he took a look at the photo anyway.
I finally have the guts to meet my ancestors in the afterlife.
Brandon patted him on the shoulder.
Child, it's been so many years. It's been tough on you. Do you want to follow me overseas and live a life abroad?
They were getting familiar with each other already. Upon hearing what he said, James looked up.
Overseas? In Austria. I believe you'd like it there.
Brandon smiled. James had heard of Austria. In fact, Zeke was filming there now, and Mr. Rand was a local. Although he'd heard of Austria before, James didn't really know much about it. Jack was a little shocked. He hadn't expected that the matriarch's background was so extraordinary. She wasn't just an ordinary woman.
That's where I live.
Both of them sat at the table, and Brandon went on patiently.
Don't worry. Nobody there will dare to bother you.
Live in Austria? James declined it right away.
My son and daughter would prefer staying put.
Although Brandon had expected that James wouldn't be comfortable moving to Austria with him, he still felt disappointed by his response. He tried to calm himself down with some tea before saying,
Would there be a chance, then, that you could bring my grandniece and grandnephew to visit me in Austria for a while?
Brandon was sincere about it. James couldn't bear to reject him. After some hesitation, he nodded. Brandon was delighted.
Where are they? Tucker just got discharged from the hospital. When he's better, I'll bring him to visit you.
James replied seriously.
Bessy is overseas now. She's very busy with her research work. I'll talk to her about it when she's back.
James actually wasn't sure whether Bessy would be willing to meet Brandon. She had always had a mind of her own, so James wouldn't decide for her. Of course, Brandon knew that Bessy was busy. Moreover, she was busy with something that he couldn't find any information about. But he didn't want to say so much right now. They spoke for a good part of the afternoon, with Brandon doing most of the talking as he filled James in about the matriarch of the family. It was already 4 in the afternoon when they parted. Brandon went back to his temporary accommodation. The middle-aged man beside him said,
"President, quite a few of the people you specified have already arrived in Austria. Do you think it's time to begin?"
The middle-aged man was referring to the Hacker Alliance matters. The Hacker Alliance was not as large-scale and systematic as Matthew's group, but it was still a serious and well-established organization. The members of the alliance were all leading figures in the hacking field. It wasn't easy to find someone to take over the Hacker Alliance, especially since they would have to earn the respect and get the approval of the senior members. Besides Clarence and his son Emmanuel, nobody else knew his actual identity. Emmanuel was very good with computers, but he was an internationally renowned programmer and was putting his time and energy into programming only. He wasn't suitable to take the role of president. That was why Brandon had to spread his net and pick a group of fairly gifted young people to groom.
"Clarence."
Brandon sat on the couch but did not answer his question.
"Tell me, what did you think of James?"
The middle-aged man lowered his head as a gesture to decline to answer. Brandon sighed lightly.
"I got it." "President, you told him right away that you were Austria's."
Clarence furrowed his brows as he recalled Jack's expression. Brandon stood up and paced about the room with his hands behind his back.
"It's all right. We're all family. I'm more than willing to help my nephew out if he asks anything of me. I'll only be returning to Austria after seeing my grandnephew."
After he went up, Clarence thought for a bit and figured out Brandon's intentions. He took his cell phone out and messaged those in Austria.
"President wants to stay behind to meet his grandnephew."
Clarence's second-in-command, who was in Austria, and the subordinates received the message.
"We'll put the grooming program on hold for now. We have to wait till the president sees his grandnephew."
Someone raised an eyebrow.
"Is the grandnephew that important? Is he really thinking he could find someone for the alliance so much as he is sharing his joy?"
He had seen most of his sister's descendants. Besides the daughter who wanted to sever ties with his sister's son, he had seen all of their photos and videos before. None of them were known in the hacking field. Episode 412. Returning to Evanston.
"The great god giant crocodile probably has an answer."
Rosemary clicked on the message and read it. Hearing this, Alexander immediately turned around and gritted his teeth.
"Giant crocodile?"
Christopher, on the other hand, had nothing to do with giant crocodile and was quite calm without overthinking things, but he still paused slightly at the mention of giant crocodile. As the chief butler of the manor, most of the manor news had to pass through him, so he naturally knew General Taylor's news about giant crocodile. He also knew about Matthew. His confusion now turned to bewilderment. Giant crocodile had just arrived in Austria, while Bessy was going to meet her friend? As far as he knew, she didn't have any friends in Austria. Mr. Cheatham and Daniel were both in Evanston at the moment. It was reasonable to say that Matthew might make a move on giant crocodile today. Most importantly, Rosemary had said that Bessy contributed to getting giant crocodile to accept her order. His eyebrows jumped, and he suddenly turned to Rosemary.
"Rosemary, could you tell me about the situation with Matthew today?"
Putting down her cup, Rosemary went over everything that happened during the incident. Christopher learned that after interrogating Bessy and realizing that he had caught the wrong person, Matthew had immediately released them. As Rosemary described, Matthew's men later apologized to them and were very polite. Who the hell was Matthew? With so many forces in Austria, Matthew and his men weren't ordinary people to be able to do their job as Interpol policemen with ease here. Glancing upstairs, Christopher formulated some guesses in his heart. Huh? Rosemary was looking down at her phone and was shocked upon seeing a message from 129's app. She immediately said in surprise,
The head security guard and the others are coming back tomorrow. Tomorrow?
Michael came downstairs without looking surprised. He just faintly glanced at her.
Then I'll go back the day after seeing the head security guard.
He didn't seem the slightest bit surprised. Rosemary was still staring at her phone in shock and was out of it. After hearing Joshua's description, she originally thought that there would be a bloody storm in Austria this time. It turned out that not only did nothing happen, but the head security guard and the other security guards were even coming back. Rosemary hadn't even managed to see Giant Crocodile in person.
You're going back?
She turned to Michael.
Yeah.
Michael lazily walked over to the table and slowly poured himself a glass of water.
I'll have Christopher buy the tickets.
Rosemary didn't know what to think.
Then the head security guard and the other security guard.
Taking a sip from the cup, Michael looked up and blankly glanced at her.
You still want to teach them how to do business? Don't worry. After this incident, they'll naturally understand the rules in Austria.
He refilled the cup with water and headed upstairs again. Staring at his back, Rosemary felt slightly puzzled. Michael seemed a little strange. He wasn't surprised and even seemed a little indifferent. While pondering over this, she went upstairs to take a bath. Christopher looked away and turned to Marvin and Alexander.
Did Miss Miller stay in Austria previously? I feel like she's familiar with the terrain here.
Marvin didn't answer and just lowered his head. Alexander shook his head and said confidently,
No, if that was the case, I would have heard of her. Really?
Christopher stood pondering at the side and trailed off. He just went out with his keys to prepare for the security guard's matter tomorrow. At noon the next day, the head security guard and the other security guards were released. Rosemary went to meet them in front of Matthew's building. They didn't say much. Rosemary didn't know much about Austria, but she knew much less than the security guards. She only briefly assessed the situation and then got into Marvin's car. Marvin was still driving his usual black car, with a black flag inserted in the rearview mirror. The security guards watched as Rosemary left. Once the car disappeared, they heaved a sigh of relief.
I can't believe we're out. Find a place to rest and don't act impulsively in the future.
One of the guards with a good memory stared at the car and hesitantly said,
Don't you think that the flag on Marvin's car seemed a little familiar? Flag?
The head security guard was a little carefree.
What flag?
Another security guard's expression was stern.
I remember that some forces in Austria have flags on their cars. Describe it. What kind of flag was it?
The black flag was small and inconspicuous. Nobody except this guard had seen it. The guard squinted.
It was black. I think there was a red mark. You must have seen wrongly.
The head security guard waved his hand dismissively, but the guard still noted this down. Their task at this time was mainly to explore and collect information. As long as they didn't cause trouble from now on, their personal safety was guaranteed. Nothing big would happen with Christopher secretly watching over them. The next day at 10 a.m., Rosemary, Michael, Bessy, and Marvin flew back to Evanston. Bessy wore a black down jacket with a red pattern on the cuffs, prepared for her by Christopher. When she got off the plane at Evanston's airport, she pulled the hood up and lowered her head, revealing only her delicate chin. Michael walked behind her, casually pulling a black suitcase. Bessy took out her phone to call James.
I was worried you wouldn't be back for the new year.
James was elated and very talkative, but in the end, he was a little hesitant. Bessy reached out to pull down her hood. What is it?
Your great-uncle wants to meet you and Tucker. Do you want to see him?
Episode 413. Finalized. Research Institute's important figures accepting students. Bessy lazily yawned with the phone at her ear. She had been busy with her project. She wasn't really in the right state of mind for questions. After hearing James's words, she paused for a few seconds before realizing that he was talking about the uncle who had recently found him. No. Bessy stuck her other hand in the big pocket of the down jacket and vaguely said, "You guys can meet, though." She wasn't interested in that uncle and only had her mind on the research project now.
Oh.
James calmly turned to Jack for a long time before plucking up his courage.
Bessy, are you coming back for the New Year? Your uncle might not be able to rush back.
New Year? Bessy raised an eyebrow. I'll see how it goes. They hung up. Glancing at her, Michael carried his suitcase in one hand and lazily reached out to wrap his arm over her shoulder. He lowered his head and casually asked,
"Was it your father?"
"Yeah, he wants me to go over for New Year's," Bessy casually replied to him. She hadn't thought of New Year's at all and had been focused on the progress of the experiment.
"Do you rarely spend New Year's with him? Then go."
Michael smiled and said with conviction,
"I'll go with you."
Hearing this, Bessy looked up at him. "You're not going home?" She was talking about the Clark family house.
"Do you want to go there?"
He thought hard and frowned.
"Then I'll take you."
Bessy just blankly glanced at him. "That's your house," she said. On the other end of the phone, James wasn't surprised by Bessy's answer. He made another call to quickly tell Brandon about this. In comparison, Brandon was a little disappointed.
"It's okay."
James was very experienced in dealing with Bessy and comforted him.
"Uncle, she'll meet you eventually."
James understood Bessy's character and how she always appeared cold, but she always saw clearly the kindness other people showed to her. He naturally felt that Brandon genuinely cared for them and believed there would be other opportunities to meet in the future. Brandon nodded. He had only heard of Bessy and Tucker's growth through James.
"It's okay. I can see my little nephew as I wish. That's enough for now."
He cheered up and asked,
"Do you think you could bring him over to visit at my house for New Year's?"
James thought of how quickly Tucker was recovering. It should be no problem to travel far by that point. Zeke couldn't come home to celebrate the New Year, and Tucker wanted to check out his workplace anyway. It would be no problem to visit Brandon at the same time. They would visit him after visiting Zeke in Austria in January.
"Okay."
James nodded. After hanging up the phone, James looked at Keith.
"Don't tell Zeke about this yet. Tucker and I want to surprise him. The New Year's ticket is a little difficult to buy."
Keith took out his phone and checked it before looking up at him.
"James, there's something I have to tell you. Austria is different from Evanston and is very messy. You have to tell Zeke after you arrive and let the crew pick you up." "It's that serious? Then I'll see how things go."
James flinched and remembered what Bessy said.
"Bessy said she might not be back."
After such a long time, Keith and Jack mostly understood her character. Keith glanced at James and tried hard to find the right words.
"James, can't you have Tucker ask his sister?"
Wasn't it good that Tucker's injury was healed? So perhaps he should go over to her and try to persuade her. How could Miss Miller possibly refuse him? They already knew that James was useless on Bessy.
"Oh,"
James reacted.
"I forgot we could try that. Let's go."
Keith looked straight and glanced at his phone.
"The meeting is about to start."
Bessy had passed the air selection and transferred the 18% of the shares to Zeke, which he then transferred to Tucker. The shares would be managed by his guardian, James. It was a large amount of shares, and he was now the second largest shareholder after the fourth son. Thus, he naturally had to participate in the shareholders' meeting. In the past half-month, James had developed a general understanding of the Miller family's operations. The fourth son wouldn't be able to make trouble for him. They entered the Miller Corporation headquarters and went to the meeting room. The fourth son had already come to the understanding that Bessy was only a temporary distraction. He hadn't expected a character like Bessy to emerge previously, but now that he had a general understanding, he naturally started making plans to deal with it. It wasn't worth scraping meat off his bones for just 18%. The fourth son glanced at James with suspicious eyes and took out his phone. Because of the time difference between Austria and Evanston, Bessy and the others returned at 10 a.m. Instead of resting, Bessy went straight to the Northwestern University laboratory. In the past 2 days, she had engaged in heavy discussions with Elijah and the others and had accumulated a lot of questions. In the laboratory, Elijah was at the innermost area, looking down to check the results. Sarah was standing beside him. A few big figures from the Research Institute were in the laboratory, and they didn't dare talk nonsense.
Bessy isn't back yet?
Mr. Bright asked Mr. Rostron, with Director Fielder standing beside them. Glancing at his phone and frowning, Mr. Rostron didn't reply to him and just glanced at Elijah. Elijah immediately said,
Miss Miller has been communicating with me about the experimental issues.
Researchers had to endure the boring process of experiments. People like Mr. Rostron simply stayed in the laboratory 24 hours a day. Mr. Bright and the others all had the intention of accepting Bessy and Elijah as students. But then, Bessy had left the country. She was gone for almost a week. She probably seemed very frivolous to them, so Elijah was trying to save her reputation. Mr. Bright and the others nodded slightly without saying anything else. Mr. Rostron walked them out. Within the next minute, Bessy changed into her lab coat and walked in. She went to the innermost area with a cold expression.
Bessy, you're back? Director Fielders and the others just left.
Elijah immediately glanced at the lobby, but couldn't see their figures anymore. You went on vacation at such a convenient time. Sarah looked up at her and pursed her lips. I think Director Fielder intended to take you as a student, but didn't expect you to be overseas. What a pity. Elijah walked over with a piece of equipment and glanced at her.
Bessy already has a teacher.
Sarah sniggered. Bessy, who's your teacher? Mr. Rostron? Episode 414. A Prince and a King. Sarah always knew that Mr. Rostron had taken a fancy to Bessy some time ago. However, she never expected that even Director Fielder and the others would look so highly upon her. With Bessy around, Sarah knew that Mr. Rostron wouldn't accept her as an apprentice. But compared to Director Fielder, she felt like she could accept it if Bessy was Mr. Rostron's student. No. Bessy was still thinking about Director Fielder and wasn't in the mood to pay attention to Sarah. She casually responded to her and then directly turned to Elijah. Elijah, what about the research results? They went to Elijah's experiment table. Elijah already knew she had a teacher and only felt pity for Director Fielder and the others. But now that they got down to business, he threw this to the back of his mind and focused on the experiment.
This is the gamma-ray penetration rate.
He picked up the file on the bench and explained it in detail. After half an hour, Mr. Rostron returned. Instead of watching the progress of his own experiment, he stood beside Elijah and Bessy and listened to them for a while. The two of them were so immersed in the project that they didn't even notice him. They finished discussing. Mr. Rostron? Taking her phone to send the report to Principal White, she noticed Mr. Rostron and took a step back. Mr. Rostron was always a little withdrawn, and his face wasn't very expressive. He knew about Bessy's participation in the international competition, but had not known the content. Thus, he was very surprised after hearing their discussion today.
It's okay. You can continue.
Mr. Rostron waved his hand and motioned for them to continue before returning to his own experiment bench. After standing there for a while, he looked over at Bessy's side again. He originally wasn't going to watch the ICNE international competition this year, but after hearing Bessy and Elijah's discussion, He sat down in front of the computer and sent an email to the person in charge to ask for a ticket. Ordinary audiences rarely came to see such a scientific research project, and only major reporters and research people came. But it was still difficult to get a ticket. These tickets were basically monopolized by the top 10 internationally ranked schools that would send their top students to watch. But Mr. Rostron could easily get a ticket from an acquaintance. With the competition nearing, Bessy was basically in the laboratory every day. The end of the year came and the new year started. Although it was New Year's, it was too near the competition, so Bessy's team didn't have a holiday. Not many people were around at Northwestern University at this time. During New Year's Day in Evanston, firecrackers would be set off at specified times. Starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sound of firecrackers would fade from one place to another. Not many cars were on the road and most people were walking around. At 4:30 p.m., Michael parked his car by the gate of the laboratory. The laboratory was much more deserted compared to the other places. He got out of the car while on the phone with Rosemary and looked at the gate. Rosemary covered the phone with one hand to block out the surrounding noise and covered her ear with the other hand. She shouted on the phone, afraid that Michael wouldn't be able to hear her.
"You're not coming home tonight?"
"No, I'm going to Tucker's."
Michael looked down. On the other end, Rosemary stopped in the corner of the lobby. She fell silent while watching a bunch of young people in the school field. In the past 10 years, Michael had rarely come home. He was either on a mission or rushing in for surgery. He happened to be in Evanston this year, so Rosemary originally thought that New Year's would be more lively this year with him around. Apart from New Year's and Joshua's birthday, the Clark family rarely gathered. She remembered that Simons told her that morning that Joshua had prepared a big surprise for Bessy. At the Park Place apartments, James had taken a break a few days ago to study the menu and was now busy in the kitchen this afternoon. Jack, Keith, Ricky, and Mr. Rand were all there. Jack and the others were putting New Year's decorations on each door and window. The doorbell rang at this time. James poked his head out of the kitchen with a spatula and grinned.
"It must be Bessy."
Jack quickly put down the cuplet in his hand and opened the door with a big smile.
"Miss."
The first thing that caught his eyes was a slender and tall figure. The figure turned his head slightly, said something to the girl next to him, and walked out of the shadows elegantly.
"Jack, hello."
He smiled. Jack swallowed back his words. He immediately took a step back and suddenly felt like the original spacious living room was now cramped.
Michael."
He was in a daze. James had only said Bessy would come today, but he didn't say that the Clark family's crown prince was also coming. Michael very politely and amiably greeted him. Jack didn't dare to accept his courtesy and took a few steps back. Keith and Ricky, originally putting up decorations, also hurriedly jumped off their chairs as if their hands and feet were tied. Just when they were still at a loss, James poked his head out of the kitchen. He was obviously very happy to see Michael.
"Michael, you're just in time. Help me with dinner. The others can't do it."
Michael was obviously accustomed to this. He took off his jacket and slowly rolled up his sleeves. The kitchen wasn't far from the hall. Jack could still hear James.
"Michael, bring that plate over. Michael, what do you think of this side dish? Michael, stir that pot."
Outside, Jack and the others were frozen in place. In Evanston, who else other than James would dare to order the Clark family's crown prince around like that? Joshua probably couldn't even order him around. They exchanged glances and suddenly realized something. It turned out that the Miller family's second son was the true king. Wearing a hat, Tucker was sitting in front of the computer playing games, with Mr. Rand watching by his side. The computer screen showed pass. Sitting beside him while they discussed the game, Mr. Rand casually glanced at the screen. He happened to see a tiny logo in the left-hand side of the screen. A small, red poppy flower.
Wait!
Episode 415. A new God account. The forum exploded. Mr. Rand stared at the logo in the lower left corner. His pupils dilated. He grabbed Tucker's hand and stopped him from closing the page. Every software engineer had their own logo. The World Poker Tour was naturally the same. Mr. Rand had entered the World Poker Tour's 28th floor more than half a month ago. Apart from that, he himself was also an engineering master, so he naturally knew the top 4 software engineers in the industry. 2 people occupied the top spot in the World Poker Tour, Mr. Cheatham and Poppy, whose identities had never been revealed. Mr. Cheatham had developed the World Poker Tour's search engine that had taken the world by storm and had remained at the top thus far. Unlike Mr. Cheatham's traditional software, Poppy was the most well-known because she had developed artificial intelligence 20 years ahead of its time. The reason Poppy was better known than Mr. Cheatham was because her programs were distributed in the forum for free. It was true that not many people could solve the source code issued by her, but these things weren't important. Everyone in the industry knew that Mr. Cheatham's logo was a maple leaf, while Poppy's was a red poppy. No one would dare imitate Poppy. Thus, at a glance, Mr. Rand immediately recognized the logo in the lower left corner of Tucker's screen.
Where did you get this software from?
His tone. Tucker was silent for a moment. He glanced inquisitively at Bessy when she entered from the side. Mr. Rand also followed his gaze and immediately paused when he saw Bessy. Bessy leaned lazily against the door and played with her phone. If anyone had been standing beside her, they would have seen the World Poker Tour's forum homepage displayed on her screen. She was halfway through reading the link when she looked up at Mr. Rand. Forum. Mr. Rand stood up and asked in fluent English.
What forum?
Bessy's expression was blank. Add my Twitter and I'll send you the link. Mr. Rand immediately took out his phone and opened Twitter. During this time, Bessy had already copied the link and was prepared to send it. She directly sent it to him. Mr. Rand clicked on it. He immediately saw a red logo. Poppy. His eyes widened.
This is Poppy's account? When did the engineering god Poppy make an account? Why didn't anyone realize?
Poppy was very secretive, and most of the news about her was released from Mr. Cheatham or the World Poker Tour. Seeing her private account, he immediately clicked on it. Disregarding everything else, he sat down again and slowly read through it. Tucker also leaned over to take a look. He memorized the website and Poppy's account. Then, he looked away and opened up the website on his own phone. Bessy walked over to look. Tucker was still searching. Poppy. She was speechless. Although Tucker majored in software programming, Bessy had taught him hacking before, so he knew how to filter messages and search for blocked content. He looked up at Bessy. Bessy looked away and simply left the room with her phone. I'm going to find Michael. At around 6 p.m., Michael and James were mostly done with their work. His kitchen ventilator was rather good and there wasn't any smoke. Leaning against the kitchen door and watching Michael plate the dishes with James, she thought that he was rather artistic.
Bessy, are you hungry?
James poured a dish into the blazing pot and stepped aside for Michael to handle it. He opened another pot and began putting in slices while saying to her,
Wait a minute more. This is the last dish.
After putting in salt and plating it, he brought these 2 dishes outside and instructed Bessy and the others.
Don't enter my kitchen.
She was speechless. She crossed her arms and watched as Michael stood in front of the pot and plated it very neatly. His movements were calm and slow and looked rather graceful. He was doing it as he had done it often before. No wonder James always asked him to help in the kitchen. Admit it. You've been to the New Western Chef. Bessy thought of the advertisement he often watched. Since he had learned so many random things, it wouldn't be surprising if he had gone there too. The kitchen fan was rather noisy, but Bessy's voice could still be heard. He took the time to glance at her and raised an eyebrow, looking rather doubtful.
This has to be learned.
Bessy silently closed the kitchen door. They had dinner at 7 p.m. Jack, Keith, and Ricky were very reserved. Finally, watching Michael help them set up the exquisite bowls and silverware brought by James, their reserve disappeared a little. Jack even turned on the TV to watch the celebration. The window was closed, but the sound of fireworks could still be faintly heard. They were on a high floor and fireworks could be seen in the central garden next door. It was lively and crowded. Mr. Rand only came out when dinner started. He didn't celebrate New Year's, but he had been influenced by the liveliness. He had also helped to hang the decorations, but was a little distracted at this moment. James put down a couple small glasses of wine and drank slowly with Michael. Michael poured a glass and drank with him before glancing at Bessy, who ignored him. He poured another glass without changing his expression. Mr. Rand finished eating and bid them farewell.
Is Mr. Rand all right?
Jack was quite concerned. Yeah. Tucker turned to Bessy and faintly said, He found his idol's account.
Oh.
Jack nodded and then turned to the TV. He laughed. At the thought of something, James went to his room and returned with red packets that he handed to Bessy, Tucker, and Michael. Then he continued drinking with Michael. While on a group video call with Mary and the others, Bessy turned to the TV, curious to see what Jack was laughing about. Her phone rang at that moment. It was Mr. Cheatham. Did he want to wish her Happy New Year this year? He didn't usually do so. She hung up the video call with the others and picked up. Mr. Cheatham. On the other end, Mr. Cheatham was silent for a while. He found a quiet spot and said,
What did you do? Someone called me just now and said that the company's forum has become paralyzed.
It was New Year's and he didn't want to work overtime. Bessy continued watching TV and lightly said, I was forced to register an account. Episode 416, ICNE International Competition. Information about Bessy's role in the World Poker Tour had always been hidden. Not only was she young at the time when it was founded, but she was also impatient and had a bad temper. Anxious and hot-tempered, she only had patience for the development of source codes. She simply didn't reveal her face. She basically acted as a silent partner. In the end, she became the most mysterious person at the center of the World Poker Tour, whom even the World Poker Tour didn't have information on. During New Year's, most of them were very busy, but there were also many in the World Poker Tour who didn't celebrate, like Mr. Rand. People who didn't commemorate the New Year's always went to the forum. As soon as one person knew of Poppy's account, it meant everyone in the entire engineering community did too. The news spread, and even some computer students knew that this person was regarded as a god by the major professors of the computing department. Most students clicked on the link to take a look. The World Poker Tour didn't usually have so many page views, and only employees or insiders visited the website. But not only was the number of views overloaded tonight, but so was the number of downloads. Bessy had made public all the 30-odd game software links she had. Everyone knew that Poppy's products were exquisite. They downloaded them instantly. This was the specific reason why the forum had collapsed. After listening to Bessy's explanation, Mr. Cheatham couldn't help but look to the sky in silence.
Okay, I understand.
He had no other choice. No one in the company could lecture Bessy, not even Alejandro. Firstly, she was the chief engineer. specially invited by the company. Secondly, she never got paid. Even Mr. Cheatham didn't know why she had wanted to come to this company, and he couldn't get a reply from her. She would just say that she was solving the source code, not modeling it. After hanging up, he continued working overtime to maintain the forum so as to not disturb any other employees' New Year's celebrations. Because of this, Poppy, who had gradually faded out of everyone's field of vision after the summer vacation, suddenly returned to everyone's radar. Her forum fans rose from 0 to 8,900, sweeping past everyone else in an invincible manner. Of course, these fans weren't comparable to her fans on Twitter. Michael and James were still drinking. Halfway through, James took out his phone to video call Zeke, who had just ended work and was celebrating with his crew. After Bessy and Tucker greeted him, James regretfully said,
"I wanted to fly to Austria originally, but Keith said no ticket was available."
They talked for about 20 minutes before hanging up for Zeke to have dinner. At James's side, Michael looked up after they hung up and turned to him.
"James, when are you going to Austria? We're also heading there." "Are you going to that competition too?"
James was a little drunk, but was still in a good mood.
"Tucker and I are going in a few days, but it's difficult to buy the tickets."
Michael glanced at Bessy, who was sitting side by side with Jack, watching TV on the sofa. He swirled his glass of wine, leaned back, and lazily said,
"It just so happens that their school team is leaving next month on the 17th. I'll buy tickets for us together."
"But there are no tickets." James was taken aback. Michael lowered his eyes and took another sip of wine.
"There are."
On February 17th, Northwestern University's international team departed. There was a time difference between Evanston and Austria, and it would take a day to get there. After introducing the venue to them and getting to know the other teams, it would take a day to adjust to their best condition. Northwestern University's team set off rather late because the school had a longer break for New Year's. The University of Chicago's team had already left for Austria 2 weeks ago. Northwestern University's team didn't have many people, and the leaders were Dean Soup and Dr. Weatherby. The ICNE International competition was very important to Northwestern University. University's rankings were based on various scientific research results and academic reports, among which SCI papers and influential competitions were of utmost importance. They were Northwestern University's only team that had qualified for an international competition in recent years. For Northwestern University, especially the Science and Technology Department, it was extremely important. Bessy, Kara, Gary, Kai, and Elijah gathered. In the past 3 months, Kara and Kai had undergone huge changes. The 5 of them stood together and discussed the project in low voices. Elijah and Gary each held a document in their hands. They all stayed together with the school teams. Instead of sitting with Bessy and the others, Michael got onto the plane first, with James and the others at the VIP entrance. Once they had entered, Keith turned to Ricky and hesitantly asked,
"Weren't the tickets sold out?"
Ricky shook his head, looked away from Michael, and then turned to Bessy again with a slightly solemn attitude.
"I don't know."
The plane set off at 9:30 a.m. It arrived at Austria's landing strip at 4 p.m. Standing on the tarmac, Michael glanced at the Northwestern University team and paused. He turned to James.
"James, someone is really coming to pick you up?" "Go with Bessy first."
James was worried about her and wanted Michael to hurry off.
"Tucker's uncle will come to pick us up."
Michael nodded slightly.
"Okay."
The landing strip was his own territory. He had already informed General Taylor to keep an eye on James and the others to ensure that nothing happened to them. Michael was assured and nodded to them before directly walking to the exit. Glancing around, James informed Brandon of their location. He didn't contact Zeke. With Brandon around, James was assured of his and Tucker's safety. He didn't want to affect Zeke's filming and also wanted to give him a surprise. Brandon arrived very quickly. Michael had only left 20 minutes before Brandon arrived. James gave him a belated New Year's greetings and beamed widely.
"Tucker, this is your uncle."
Following behind, Jack also respectfully greeted him.
"Great uncle."
Having already seen Tucker in videos before, Brandon was even happier to see him in person. His smile spread widely across his face and couldn't be hidden.
"I thought you would arrive a little later."
Brandon led them out of the landing strip with a cheerful expression.
"Come and stay with us for a while."
Holding Tucker with one hand, James thought of something and said,
"We came in time to watch Bessy's competition as well. Uncle, do you want to come along? It's that competition with tickets that are difficult to get, but Bessy is sure to have more tickets with her."
As he talked, Clarence glanced at him, his lips twitching. There were tickets in Austria that the president couldn't get? These two had high taste and didn't take such ordinary competitions to heart. Brandon didn't think much of it and simply asked,
"What kind of competition is it? Can I go?"
"I think it's some academic competition." James took out his phone to message Bessy.
"I'll ask Bessy for a ticket. If she doesn't have it, I'm sure Michael will."
Brandon smiled and nodded. With his myriad of experiences, such an ordinary event in Austria was considered nothing to him. He was only excited to see his strange grandniece. Episode 417. The competition begins. After a minute, James turned to face Brandon with his phone in his hand.
"Michael said it will start at 9 o'clock on the 20th.
Clarence was stunned after hearing this and looked in Brandon's direction. Brandon was standing beside James. His expression remained the same, and he said while smiling,
"On the 20th, we'll definitely go."
Bessy and the school team stayed at the residence arranged by the ICNE organizers. Jack stayed in a hotel located near both Bessy and Zeke. James and Jack did not consider staying at Brandon's place at all. Jack didn't realize that Brandon was special and so did not think much about it. But now, even though Clarence was polite to James, Jack did not feel that he was being sincere. Ever since the first time they met, he didn't care much about Evanston and sounded indifferent when talking about Evanston's forces. Brandon didn't mind taking James to the Hall family once he reached Austria. However, his family members would likely act similarly to Clarence. Although the Miller family had fallen, Jack still retained his strong pride. They only reached James's hotel after a few hours. After Brandon looked at the hotel, he felt quite satisfied. It was late when they reached it, so Brandon stayed the night in the hotel suite. As he had to attend Bessy's competition on the 20th, Brandon left for the Hall family home the next day to settle some matters. The car was parked downstairs. In the car, Clarence hesitated and asked him,
"Chairman, the young recruits will be coming on the 20th.
As a hacker, Brandon kept his identity a secret. There were no photos of him on the internet, and his information and particulars could also not be found. Those who knew his identity were his close friends. Brandon wanted to groom a few young people to take over the alliance. Clarence hadn't expected him to attend an academic competition of some distant relative from the Hall family on the 20th.
"It's okay."
Brandon waved his hand disapprovingly.
"It's not easy to find time to meet my grandniece."
Brandon had observed that James, Jack, and Tucker all had different expressions once he mentioned his grandniece that he had not met. It made him feel like they were all submissive to her. This was why Brandon was determined to meet Bessy. Clarence listened to Brandon's words. He could sense his determination and did not speak further. He felt a sense of pity.
Regarding Miss Hall's children, should we inform the rest of the Hall family?
Clarence changed the topic. In the beginning, there were two exceptional talents in the Hall family. Brandon secretly managed the Hacker Alliance, and his sister was highly looked up to. However, she had disappeared without a trace. After a decade, the Hall family had finally found some clues. Clarence didn't expect to discover that the extraordinary Miss Hall had gotten married to someone from the Miller family in Evanston, despite the many eligible men in Austria. She had then passed away together with the Miller family's patriarch without any explanation. Once found, they would have to go to the Hall family to pay respects to their ancestors.
We can ask them in a few days.
Brandon looked outside the window. After some thought, he said,
Let them slowly accept it before we ask them.
Brandon could tell that James didn't know much about Austria's forces. On the other side of town, Bessy and Kara reached the hotel arranged by the Research Institute. The hotel often hosted research teams. They were given a suite with 5 rooms. The Research Institute was situated in the center of Austria. It was near the National Violin Association, and Matthews Building was 2 streets away. Those situated near Matthews territory in Austria shouldn't be easily provoked. The National Violin Association was backed by the Moss family. So was Austria's Research Institute. The research projects there were horrifying, and the big bosses had to give deference to these researchers, especially since they had to rely on them for thermal weapons. Their building was built near Matthews as it was a safe location. It would be dangerous in other areas. With support from their big boss, Austria's Research Institute had a lot of money and could spend a lot on the top physics students participating in ICNE. When Bessy and the rest put down their luggage, Dean Soup of the Northwestern University Department gathered the 5 of them and solemnly said,
It's your first time in Austria. I have explained the rules. Remember them carefully. I will remind you one last time. Do not wander around. The Research Institute is the safest place in Austria, but do not let your guard down, because even the Austria Research Institute's dean might not be able to protect you.
Bessy thought about the last key point, but listened to all Dean Soup's reminders. The other 4 had serious expressions on their faces. Dean Soup talked to Dr. Weatherby and hurriedly left for the stadium for a meeting. This was the highest award in the physics department and was very respected by people from many countries. The process was specific and formal, with an opening and a closing ceremony. The ICNE committee was specially picked from the best of the best in the physics field.
Bessy, did you hear Dean Soup say that the dean of the Austria Research Institute, Dean Manuel Turner, was part of the committee? Even the great Ian Walsh from Australia, who won first place during the 16th, 17th, and 18th games consecutively, is here.
Kai was very excited as it was his first encounter with someone on such a high level. On the way, Dean Soup had told them about some famous people in Austria. Ian was 18 years old when he won the ICNE competition and became history's youngest winner. He had won for 3 consecutive years. Now, he was still under 25 years old, yet he had become part of the committee. Other people his age had just started joining the competition. On February 20th, 100 teams arrived at the ICNE competition site, and the competition began. Episode 418. This team looks a little young. The projects had already been completed by the teams in advance. The final round was for the teams to present their research results. The audience stood in the designated area to look at the research projects. James, Tucker, and Jack woke up early and called Brandon. Brandon arrived at the hotel at 8:30 a.m. in a limousine. Clarence was driving the limo. He opened the door and saw James approaching in a hurry. He smiled and said,
"Sir, there is no need to hurry. It's still early."
Clarence waited for the trio to get in. Looking in the rearview mirror, he started the car.
"What's the competition's location?"
Although they had talked about watching Brandon's grandniece at the competition 2 days ago, Clarence hadn't taken it to heart and thus did not ask for the location.
"Wait."
James took out his phone to look for a message from Michael. He read out the address after confirming it. The address was simple. It was Austria's Research Institute in Matthew's territory. James didn't fully understand Austria's different forces, but Clarence and Brandon were familiar with them. Hearing the address, Clarence's hands stopped. He had thought that the competition was similar to an Olympiad and would be held near the fringes of the city. The address was unexpectedly so near to Matthew's building.
"Are you sure this address is correct?"
Clarence looked at the rearview mirror again in doubt. Even Brandon was curious. James looked at the address again. He nodded and said,
"Yes."
Clarence didn't ask further. In 10 minutes, they arrived at the location. Brandon and the others did not know the meaning of IC&E that was written on the building. However, they were familiar with the Research Institute.
"So, it's a competition held by the Research Institute."
Clarence was surprised. He followed James and the others inside. As the tickets were limited, the audience was mostly students from famous universities. They were dressed in their school jackets. They were mostly top university students. Top students were everywhere. Clarence walked among these talented students and felt slightly pressured. At 9 a.m., all 100 teams had finished their preparations. The country leaders dispersed, and the committee members looked at the project content and presentations one by one. The topic was National Defense Rescue Intelligence Creation with the integration of nuclear reactor arrays. This highly challenging central topic was set by a group of researchers last year. The committee and judging team walked down the aisles, finishing with one team and then moving to the next team. They looked at the list while walking. Dean, Turner, and Ian were part of the list. There were almost 500 people, and Dean Turner randomly flipped through the contestant list. He was looking at the contestants' age instead of the project content. They were mostly 26 to 31 years old, doctoral students. He scanned the list quickly. On the second to last page, he was just about to flip again when he saw something, and his hands froze. He noticed a team that seemed a little arrogant. They also had 5 people, but their ages were outrageous. 3 of them were 19, and the other 2 were 20 and 27 years old, respectively. Other than the last member, the ages weren't normal. Dean Turner froze. One of them must be capable enough to enroll for the IC&E competition, though. He turned his gaze to the particulars of the team members.
"The team representing Northwestern University."
Dean Turner looked at the names of the 5 members.
"Why have I not heard of them in the previous competitions? Ian, take a look at this team. They are even more extraordinary than your previous team."
Dean Turner passed the list to him. Although Ian was 18 years old when he entered the competition, his 4 other team members were of normal ages. They were exemplary, and Ian could match up to them. Looking at this team, 4 of the members were similar to Ian's age back then. Dean Turner hadn't heard of the only older member. Ian's expression turned solemn. He leaned in and looked over. The 4 unique team members did not catch his attention. He wanted to replicate Ian's success, but it was extremely rare for someone to reach such a standard at 18 years old. In the end, the project ranking was the most important thing. In the eyes of Northwestern University's dean, getting into the top 30 would be an impressive feat. However, to Ian and Dean Turner, Teams had to be in the top 3 to be recognized. Ian casually took a glance and was about to turn back. But as his eyes spotted Bessy's name, his hands paused.
What's wrong?
Dean Turner was curious about his reaction.
Can we look forward to this team doing well?
Ian pointed to Bessy's name with his fingertips while flipping through the details.
This is the person who achieved 50% energy conversion previously.
The SCI thesis papers were sent to Austria's Research Institute for approval. When the data was first produced, the researchers in the laboratory were stunned. Dean Turner recalled this incident. He froze, then nodded.
We can pay more attention to them later, but her teammates are dragging her down. How did Northwestern University allocate the teams?
He flipped through the resume of the 4 other members. The 27-year-old member was capable, but the other 3 were complete newcomers who did not have a decent SCI thesis. Ian frowned with regret. In addition to personal capabilities, it was important to have equally good teammates. Why did Northwestern University allocate 3 newcomers to drag her down? He pursed his lips.
If only.
Episode 419. The Meeting.
No wonder I've not heard of this group. The members aren't on the same level. There are only 8 hours today.
Dean Turner hesitated for a bit before saying,
Let's visit those who can enter the top 10 first.
Academic research was rigorous. All 100 teams had to be assessed by the committee. The entire process of judging team members took many days. Hence, the judges would visit the highly anticipated teams first. These teams were predicted to receive a high ranking. Today was the first day of the exhibition, and all 5 members were at the event location. Every ICNE competition was filled with experts in their field. Other than Dean Turner and Ian, besides looking at the nationality of the contestants, the rest also noticed this arrogant team. Bessy's team had registered late. Other than her, the other 4 team members were unknown. It was almost as if nobody cared. Leaders from various countries and schools watched the competition while standing outside the exhibition area. Dean Soup and Dr. Weatherby went to visit teams from other countries in the meantime. Beside the exhibition stand was a board showing the evaluation of the team members. Everyone was outstanding. The exhibition ended at 5 p.m. Dean Soup and Dr. Weatherby waited outside. Bessy and her team came out after the crowd had dispersed. Before Dean Soup could ask them about what happened, he heard someone calling from afar. Dean Soup looked in the direction of the sound and saw his nemesis. University of Chicago's Science and Technology Department's Dean Hoffman.
Does Northwestern University not have any quota? How could you let 4 freshmen attend this summit?
Dean Hoffman had seen Dean Soup during the meeting yesterday. However, he only had the opportunity to look at the contestant list today.
At this type of competition,
The 2 universities had been fighting for a long time, but when it came to the international competitions, they stood on the same side. Dean Hoffman looked at Bessy and her teammates. Hesitating, he didn't finish his sentence.
Did the judges come to see your project today?
Gary shook his head and replied with a respectful tone.
No. I knew it,
said Dean Hoffman while shaking his head. The judging team would only look at those highly anticipated teams. Basically, the teams that they visited on the first day could probably enter the top 20. Dean Soup hoped that Bessy's team could enter the top 40. Hearing Dean Hoffman's words, he was slightly disappointed. However, if not for Bessy's mysterious teacher who had arranged for her to join the competition, Northwestern University wouldn't even have had this chance. Bessy saw James and the others waiting for her. She picked up her jacket and nodded to Dean Soup and the others before leaving. Her appearance was calm, unlike her other nervous team members.
Where is she going alone?
Dean Hoffman looked at Dean Soup while frowning.
Are you letting her roam around by herself?
Dean Soup pondered.
She must be going to visit her uncle. He's doing a film here in Austria.
Dean Hoffman was speechless.
The summit hasn't ended. Don't be so arrogant.
On the other side of the room, Bessy had reached James's side and slowly said, "Father."
Where's Michael?
James looked behind her but did not see Michael. Bessy coughed and replied with a casual tone, "He has some matters to attend today."
I see.
James nodded before turning to introduce Brandon.
Bessy, this is your grand-uncle Brandon. He came especially to see you.
Bessy looked at Brandon. She politely nodded and greeted him. "Hello." She didn't call him grand-uncle. Her expression was cold, just as James had mentioned to Brandon previously. Brandon didn't mind it. He was observing Bessy and thinking about how she could attend a summit in Austria held by the Research Institute. She must be what the Bright family described her to be. A genius. He had seen Bessy on a television program. She was sharper than she seemed on television and did not seem like she came from a rural place. She surpassed all of Brandon's expectations.
Let's head to your uncle's first.
James did not mention that they would visit Zeke. After 2 days of shopping in Austria, he was waiting for Bessy so they could visit him together. Bessy put on her jacket and said unhurriedly, "Okay." They walked towards the outdoor parking lot. As they took a few steps, a group of people appeared at the door.
"Student Bessy, please wait."
It was Dean Turner and Ian. Bessy stopped and took 2 steps forward. She narrowed her eyes to look at them. James, Brandon, and the rest stopped a few steps behind her. These 2 experts wanted to ask Bessy how she achieved 50% energy conversion previously. As reporters were waiting for Dean Turner, the trio did not chat for long. Bessy tugged on her collar and walked towards James. He watched as Dean Turner and Ian were surrounded by reporters once they entered the competition site.
Who are they?
The Dean of Austria's Research Institute, Bessy said. James nodded in understanding. Brandon and Clarence were surprised. Austria had many forces. The Moss family's 3 forces stood at the top of the pyramid. The second level of power included the research institutes and family associations that were strongly backed by the Moss family. Not many people knew that Brandon was the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Without this, the Hall family would not stand a chance against the second level. Clarence looked at Bessy with a serious expression. He hid his condemnation for the Miller family's descendants.
Research Institute's chairman?
Jack was shocked.
Miss Miller, why is he looking for you?
Bessy stopped beside the car. She squeezed her fingers. Hearing Jack's words, she tilted her head. He wanted to ask me about an experiment. No one knew about the physics experiment. They waited along the roadside for Clarence to drive the car over. Many top researchers had gathered at the Research Institute today, and the surrounding areas were cordoned off. Nearby, a police car came in their direction. Brandon was talking to James. Seeing the police car, he told James,
"That's the Interpol's car. Don't look in that direction, and let them leave first."
Jack knew not to provoke Austria's forces. He anxiously took a few steps away together with Tucker, as he recalled the Clark family talking about the disappearances of family members in Austria. Clarence saw the police car and parked his car at the edge of the road. This was a common sight in Austria. Unlike others, Matthew didn't fight back indiscriminately. However, seeing Jack and Tucker taking a few steps back, he continued to stare at the car. The car slowed down as it approached them. Clarence rolled down the windows and wanted to ask Brandon if they were looking for him. Just as he was about to speak, the car stopped beside his. Episode 420. Uncle's granddaughter. What's going on? Clarence was shocked. Before he could react, a man got out of the car parked beside them. There was a faint scent of blood on him. Brandon hadn't interacted much with Matthew's men, so he could only recognize the guy. However, he was wearing the logo of the Moss family and was definitely working for Matthew. Bessy took a look at the man and also recognized that he was working for Matthew. She immediately put on a cap to cover her face while hiding behind James. James had a big build and covered her from sight completely.
"Sir, who is—"
he asked in confusion while looking at Brandon as the man got out of the car. Brandon was staring at the men who had just gotten out of the car. He shook his head and replied,
"I haven't interacted with Matthew that much." "Hi, sir, can I know, who are you looking for?"
Clarence asked nicely as the man approached. "Is this guy at the wrong place? He doesn't seem to be looking for Mr. Hall."
"I'm looking for someone else,"
replied the man as he stopped in his tracks. He then looked in Bessy's direction. Clarence looked in the direction that the man was looking and noticed Bessy. He was puzzled and thought that he must have been overthinking about the matter. As he thought of it, the man spoke respectfully in the direction that he was looking.
"Miss Miller, I have a favor to ask of you."
Miss Miller. Only one person could be addressed as Miss Miller. Clarence was confused and turned slowly towards Bessy. Bessy was still hiding behind James while using her phone to text Michael. Michael had told her that he was looking for Matthew for a chat. She hadn't expected that Matthew's subordinate would look for her. This was because their previous conversation hadn't been about the latest developments. They had not left any form of contact after the conversation either. She had instinctively walked towards James while she texted Michael, asking when his chat with Matthew would end. When she heard the man's voice, she recognized him as one of the guys who had caught her and Rosemary last time when they were in Austria. Something must have happened that led him to look for her. She sent the text to Michael and put away her phone. She then instructed James and the rest on what to do. She turned towards the man and signaled for him to follow her. They walked down the road for a while. After she made sure that they were at a safe distance away, she then asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" "The boss asked me to pass this data to you." The man took out a classified document and handed it to her. "He said that you must take a look at it." Bessy took the document. There was nothing written on the cover. She took a quick glance at it and couldn't understand why Matthew had to be so secretive. After he made sure that Bessy had accepted the document, the man returned to his car. On his way back, he greeted Clarence. Bessy wasn't going to look at the documents in such a crowded place. Hence, she walked back while holding on to it. Clarence started the car, but no one got in. Everyone was focused on Bessy. "What's wrong?" Bessy asked after she realized that everyone was staring at her. James asked smilingly,
"Bessy, do you have some connections here as well?"
"Not quite," Bessy replied after thinking for a while. Her interactions with Matthew were mainly due to Daniel. "He's a friend of Daniel's," James replied.
"Oh, he's a friend of Daniel's."
Brandon nodded and kept silent. Clarence just held the car keys while staring at Bessy. No wonder Brandon had wanted to meet her, no matter the cost. The rest got into the car. Clarence, with his hands on the steering wheel, asked,
"James, does this Daniel live in Austria as well?"
He was really curious. Matthew's subordinates knew all the powerful people in Austria. James didn't know much about Daniel. He replied while tightening his seatbelt.
"I'm not sure, but he's a really good doctor. He's currently in Evanston."
Last month, when Tucker had his accident, he had overheard from the other doctors that Daniel was a great doctor. James wasn't sure about the other aspects, but he was sure that Daniel was really famous. Clarence drove the car past the traffic light. He smiled and kept silent after hearing what James had said. James had never left the country. Hence, Clarence thought that Daniel was great on a national standard, but could never be compared to the researchers in the Medical Association in Austria. In the back of the car, James was sitting next to Brandon. Bessy was sitting next to Tucker, and Jack was sitting behind Bessy. It was almost 6 in the morning. They were about half an hour from Zeke's base. No one slept on the ride. Brandon was chatting with James and asking him to visit the Hall family.
Your room is still preserved. The tree that she planted is still alive as well. Come have a look when you're available.
As he spoke, he looked out the window, reminiscing. James's hand shook uncontrollably as he heard about the mother that he couldn't remember.
Also,
Brandon said as he looked smilingly at Bessy,
I have a granddaughter about the same age as you. She's clever too. You two will be good friends.
Bessy overheard the conversation while watching Tucker play a game. She turned to look at Brandon and nodded. James turned to look at her and said,
That's right, Bessy. Your uncle's granddaughter is a really good hacker. You can chat with her, so don't spend your entire day at the laboratory.
Brandon continued,
I'll give you her number.
He felt that the youngsters would have more interests in common. He couldn't find any topics to converse with Bessy about. As he spoke, he took out his phone and messaged his eldest son. Across town, in the Hall family house, Brandon's son opened the door of his daughter Carrie's room and gave her Brandon's instruction. Carrie was caught up in her work. When she heard Brandon's instruction, she replied impatiently, What kind of nonsense is this? She was busy and had no time to waste. Episode 420. Michael reveals his identity. Carrie closed the door after finishing the conversation. Outside the door, the Hall family's eldest son paused. He thought for a bit and then headed downstairs. He knew about his father looking for his aunt's children, but he had never met his aunt and did not have any memories of her. He wasn't as excited as Brandon by the fact that his cousins had been found. He thought about it casually and sent Brandon a message. As much as Carrie wasn't interested, Bessy wasn't either. Brandon's idea was simple. He wished that the younger generation interacted more and also hoped to use Carrie to get closer to Bessy. After all, it wasn't easy to approach Bessy. She was too cold, especially since, just as the information he'd received had suggested, she was strange. The more they interacted, the weirder it felt.
So, Bessy knows how to code too?
Brandon smiled while looking at her.
We can chat more about that later.
Hearing Brandon's words, Clarence looked in the rearview mirror. His lips twitched. If these two were to start talking about programming, one specialized in programming while the other one was just a first-year student, how could they communicate? To Brandon, Carrie was the other possible successor besides Mr. Cheatham. Their talents were outstanding compared to peers of a similar age. They also had their own style. But since Carrie was a little arrogant, she might not do. Bessy was only interested in academics. She didn't even think about the World Poker Tour lately. She politely declined Brandon's offer. Before Brandon could speak, his phone rang. Looking down, he saw that his eldest son had sent a message about Carrie. Brandon rubbed his temples and did not reply. As they chatted, they reached Zeke's filming location and found a place to eat. Meanwhile, Michael was in Matthew's office. They were calm this time. Matthew had shaved and no longer had an imposing aura. 2 cups of coffee were sent into the office. 1 cup was for Matthew and the other was for Michael.
I didn't expect Mr. Clark to be so young.
Matthew sat opposite Michael. He raised his eyebrows and took a sip of coffee. He then put the cup down and said,
I know you like to be straightforward. I want to know what you have in mind.
Michael had been making things difficult for Matthew for the past 6 months. At this critical juncture, he had already lost 2 forces to him. Michael maintained his composure and raised his eyebrows.
I have nothing in mind.
Matthew narrowed his eyes and looked at him in disbelief. He knew he was scheming. He had wanted to escape from Austria 2 years ago, but Matthew hadn't expected another comeback a year ago. It caused Austria many troubles. Matthew had been looking for evidence against him. However, Michael was too clever, and so far he hadn't found any evidence.
Hacker B wanted to help you.
Michael drank his coffee and looked at him with a serious expression.
Since you let go of her previously, I won't cause you any additional trouble. I hope we can reach a consensus on this.
He put down the cup and stood up, then politely said his farewell and left. There were no permanent enemies, only permanent benefits. Michael and his team typically did not work with others. This time, seeing him shift from his ordinary practice, Matthew was a little shocked. He didn't get along with Michael normally. With their 2 personalities, unless someone gave in, they would remain hostile. Compromise was impossible for them. Matthew had not expected Michael to give in. After letting Bessy go, he hacked into Bessy and Rosemary's specific information. He knew about the relationship between Bessy and Michael. Had Michael given in because of her?
Boss?
Matthew was thinking as his subordinate came back with Bessy's information.
I've sent the documents to Miss Miller.
Matthew nodded. He was about to speak when he suddenly recalled something and abruptly stood up from the table. The coffee cup near his hand fell to the ground. Matthew's men were stunned.
Boss, are you okay?
Matthew waved his hand. He stood beside the table and remembered what Michael said. Michael had not mentioned Bessy. He only mentioned B. He meant... Matthew's thoughts started to align. He turned on his phone and looked at his conversation with Hacker B. He was amused after looking through it. Could it be her? Michael sent a message to Bessy when he came out, as he wanted to know where she was. Zeke was staying at the film site after they had all eaten. Brandon invited James and the rest to the Hall residence. James had always thought he was an orphan, as he did not remember his parents' faces at all. Hearing Brandon's invite, he hesitated before accepting it. It was already 9 p.m. and the Hall residence was a distance away. Bessy overheard their conversation. She didn't ask them to take her back first and sent the Hall's address to Michael. They reached the Hall residence close to 10 p.m. The residence was in the center of Austria, within the domain of the Moss family. It was a luxurious manor within a small area. Everything could be easily seen at once. At this time, the manor was brightly lit. The car stopped outside and they all got out. Seeing the manor, Jack was shocked. Brandon wasn't an ordinary person. He must be of a certain status to have a manor like this in Austria. He looked at James and Tucker in worry. He was reckless. He shouldn't have allowed James to visit the Hall residence. They would definitely stand out. Bessy and James got out of the car. Clarence gave the car keys to the guard and turned to look at James and the rest. James and Jack had never seen such an ancient-looking manor and were shocked by it. Clarence had expected this reaction. Just as he was about to look away, he spotted the odd one out. Bessy. Episode 422. Ranking. Bessy casually glanced at the manor and then looked away. She didn't seem shocked, like Jack and the others. She looked up at Brandon and politely bade him farewell. "Excuse me, I'll take my leave now. I have some programming to do for tomorrow. Leave now? Brandon was a little stunned.
I'll get Clarence to take you back. Austria is a little messy at night, so it isn't safe for you to go back on your own.
Bessy shook her head and waved to him as she started walking out. No need. Someone is coming to pick me up. Brandon looked at James in concern.
Bessy?
But James wasn't worried about her. He simply said,
It's fine. Bessy knows what she's doing. Moreover, there's Michael around. It must be him coming to get her.
James was calm. Brandon looked at his expression and decided there was no need to say more. He led them inside. It was already 10 at night. Only a few managers of the manor were still waiting in the main hall when they returned. Brandon's expression darkened.
Where are my eldest son and the rest? The eldest son and Miss Hall have gone to rest.
The few managers of the Hall family replied politely.
We already asked them to come back down.
It was true that they had gone up to rest, but the primary reason was that they simply didn't respect the descendants of Brandon's sister enough. If it had been Emmanuel instead, even Miss Hall would have been waiting here. Not to mention the eldest son. Nobody in the Hall family dared to be disrespectful to Emmanuel. Even Brandon would show him difference. Having left the Hall family, Emmanuel was still doing well in Austria and had a lot of connections and resources. All of them knew this, but none of them said it. James didn't really mind. He was just here to have a look at his late mother's bedroom anyway.
Uncle, why don't we have a look at the bedroom and that tree?
Brandon suppressed his anger and took James and Jack upstairs. He spoke to James as they walked up.
You have an older cousin and a younger cousin. Your younger cousin is rather outstanding, and his character is a little like Bessy's. But he's been busy recently and hardly comes back. You can stay a night. I'll check if he's free to come home tomorrow.
Brandon's expression softened much more as he mentioned his second son. The only person in the Hall family from whom Brandon needed to get permission was Emmanuel. Jack glanced at him. Brandon seemed to always be in commanding mode when he was with the Hall family members. He was only like this with James. Jack could tell that his status was pretty high up in the Hall family. On the first floor, Clarence poured himself a glass of water. He didn't follow Brandon and the others. When they went upstairs, the few managers quietly asked him about Miss Hall's descendants. Clarence was a little stunned by their questions and shook his head. Only Bessy and Tucker were a little more outstanding among the Miller family members. They were both young, and Clarence hadn't figured out the oddness about Bessy yet. As for James, he was too ordinary. Clarence didn't pay much attention to him. Back when Brandon first found James, he wouldn't have believed that he was Miss Hall's son, if not for the DNA test. Although there were environmental factors at play, with his history of having been abducted as a child, Clarence was still disappointed. Seeing Clarence's expression, the few managers roughly got what he meant. Miss Hall's descendants were just ordinary.
Mr. Hall mentioned letting James return. I wonder if he really will.
They were rather expectant about this matter. The Hall family didn't know Brandon's identity, but they knew that Emmanuel used to be a member of the Hacker Alliance and had left it voluntarily. He even joined the World Poker Tour after that. He was the most respected member of the Hall family. It was only natural that they had expectations. The Hall family wasn't sure about Bessy's matters, nor did they know that Michael had sold one of her identities. She'd been busy with the ICNE program. The program was over 3 days. Only on the first day of the ICNE program had all the members present for the judge's evaluation. At midnight on February 24th in Austria, the official ranking for the 100 teams was released. That night, none of the teams slept a wink. The accommodation areas of Austria's Research Institute were all lit up. Northwestern University and the University of Chicago halted crossfire for once and refreshed the page repeatedly in Dean Soup and Dr. Weatherby's rooms. Dean Soup's living room was full of people. The two full teams and their leaders were anxiously awaiting the ranking. It was also still close to the new year, so they huddled together in the room after their reunion dinner. They were all in high spirits despite the anxiety. Dean Hoffman was holding a cup of water and checking the time on his watch. It was the 58th minute. Just 2 more to go. He took a sip and scanned the place. 3 people were missing from the Northwestern University group.
Where are Bessy and Gary from your school?
Over the past 2 days, Dean Hoffman had also gotten to know this group of people from Northwestern University. Kara responded without even looking up. They're still working on their research project. Dean Hoffman and the rest of the people from the University of Chicago were speechless. The competition was already over and they were still working on it? At exactly midnight, Dean Hoffman hurried to Dean Soup, who was holding the mouse.
It's time. Refresh it.
Dean Soup was also nervous. He had logged into the page long ago and was just waiting to refresh it. Dean Hoffman jumped the gun a little. Although the official release was at midnight, there was usually some delay. The first time Dean Soup refreshed it, nothing came up. But the second time, a pale green table appeared. The first column was the school name. The second was the number of people in the group. The 3rd to 6th columns were the results. The 7th column gave the total score, and the 8th was the ranking. After the table appeared, Dean Soup's hand stopped moving. Dean Hoffman went quiet, too. The students of the University of Chicago couldn't wait.
Dean Hoffman, why aren't you scrolling?
Then, they came forward to look. Their words dried on their lips. The first column read, Northwestern University. The 8th column read, First. Episode 423, An End to the Competition. They could only see the first 20 rows. They had to scroll to see more rows of the table. Dean Soup, Dean Hoffman, and the rest did not plan to look closely at the first page. They just wanted to know who the top 3 teams were. After all, they were expecting to be ranked 50th or so, and would only be shown from the second page onwards. They saw the name of the first team, and everyone could tell at once that it was Bessy's team. Not only were the competitors of the University of Chicago shocked, but even Dean Soup and Dean Hoffman were also a little stunned. For the first time ever, Dean Hoffman rubbed his eyes and took a second look. The team in first place did not change. Both Dean Soup and Dean Hoffman knew what this meant. Dean Hoffman looked towards Dean Soup.
First place. We have a team that got into the top 3, and the first place at that.
Upon hearing that, the leaders at the adjacent table quickly put their beers down and rushed over to check it out. Dean Soup's hand shook as he gripped the mouse. Compared to the rest of them, Kara was rather calm. They had already witnessed Bessy's ability during the research process. Kara ran back to their 5-room suite and told Bessy about it. Bessy was currently discussing some research stuff with Gary and Elijah. Upon hearing Kara's words, she simply nodded at her and then continued her discussion. Kara looked at these 3 calm people and thought about the excited lot in the main hall. Kara stood rooted to the ground for a while before slowly walking back. A few people had just snapped back to reality.
Hurry, tell President Flores about this.
After checking it over a few times, Dean Soup got up and said to Dr. Weatherby,
Tell him about this good news.
This really was good news for Northwestern University. Dr. Weatherby picked up the phone with trembling hands and gave President Flores a call. There was a time difference between the 2 continents. It was about 5 in the afternoon where President Flores was. He was having tea with Joshua in the pavilion. President Flores's cell phone rang. He knew that Dr. Weatherby had led the teams for an international competition over the last 2 days. President Flores smiled when he saw that it was him calling. Before he picked up, he said to Joshua,
"Bessy and the rest must have achieved some good results."
He picked up the call and heard Dr. Weatherby's voice right away.
"The results are out. Bessy's team is in first place."
First place?
President Flores could barely believe it. Joshua was playing with his parrot. Upon hearing President Flores, he turned around and asked confidently,
"Bessy's team isn't too bad, right?"
He was confident in her abilities.
"Not too bad. It's better than that."
President Flores stood up and said,
"I have to contact the Research Institute. There'll be reporters then. I have to leave now."
Joshua had no idea what he meant and was confused for a moment. He turned around and told Simons,
"President Flores's expression is a little strange."
He then got Simons to find out what was going on. In less than 10 minutes, Simons returned with a weird expression. Joshua placed his parrot in the cage and asked,
"What is it?"
President Flores had left so quickly, and although Joshua didn't know much about the competition, his expression had made him curious. Simons took a deep breath.
"Sir, this ICNE competition is at the highest level in the field. There's no age category, and the results are solely based on their final product. Miss Miller's team is the first local team to achieve first place in 24 terms. After 40 years, we finally got it back. Moreover, their team has broken the ICNE record for the team with the youngest average age and the strongest abilities. From what I heard, the labs in Austria are in utter shock."
At the same time, the researchers at the Research Institute heard of this news.
5 young people with an average age of 20.
The researchers were getting agitated. This was fantastic news for the Research Institute. They were calling Mr. Rostron to congratulate him for producing such an outstanding student in his lab. It called for a celebration. 40 years ago, the field did have its glory days. But it only lasted a year. After the leading figure left the field, they had only gotten worse each year. From then onwards, the local research institute became a nobody on the international stage. For so many years, none of them had entered the top 3 places, much less achieved first place. It was difficult even when they sent almost 100 teams. Back in Austria, the younger students had no idea about this once glorious past, but the older groups of people who knew what this meant for the industry couldn't conceal or suppress their excitement. They'd gone into the next room to cheer and rejoice.
"Bessy's team of 5 is amazing,"
a student researcher from the University of Chicago said in admiration.
4 first-year students and 1 external member with an average age of under 21. This is amazing. From today onwards, our team will have to take a trip over to Austria to learn something too.
Little did they know that in this group of 5, Bessy and 3 of the other students had only begun their research in November of last year. Meanwhile, Elijah, the only person who was really in this line of study, had only joined them about a month ago. This research had come together with only a little preparation. Dr. Weatherby did not say anything. He simply opened the windows. From where he stood, he could see the 5 country flags hanging off of Austria's Research Institute building. One of them had been replaced by their country's flag. It had been 40 years. Their team had finally returned to Austria. Episode 424. So used to being proud. The closing ceremony for this event was on the 25th of February in Austria. Lots of reporters were on standby. Bessy's team came in first and was the youngest group in history. They were surely the stars of the show. After the closing ceremony in Austria, there was going to be another round of interviews locally. Bessy couldn't be bothered with these and got Elijah to attend them instead. She was busy analyzing the data from Matthew in her room. The data was regarding the happenings of the Underground Alliance in Asia many years ago. Bessy sat at her laptop and flipped through all the data. She then got up calmly and went to get a lighter to burn all the pages. She took a look at the time on her cell phone. At 9:30 a.m., Bessy put away her laptop, picked up her bag, and left. When she got to the elevator, her cell phone rang. Bessy glanced at the number. It was Matthew. She pressed the elevator button with one hand and stuffed her earpiece into her ear with the other, then pressed the voice changer button.
What is it?
Why are you helping me?
Matthew thought for a few days after Michael spoke to him about it. He had finally decided to contact Bessy. Hacker B had appeared in the international field before and was always a symbol of justice. So, Matthew could never figure out why B was helping him all of a sudden. Unless B was a justice warrior who had no connections with other authorities and groups. But now, Michael said that Bessy was B. Matthew was getting even more confused. He had spoken to Bessy before. First, she was too young. Second, Hacker B was someone familiar with Asia. Bessy raised a brow when she heard the question.
Why do you ask this all of a sudden?
They had worked together for over 2 years. Matthew had never checked on her.
Nothing much.
Matthew was in his seat and looking out of the window.
Mr. Clark told me you were the one I held hostage last time. I wanted to verify this.
Matthew didn't want to beat around the bush. He knew that he wouldn't be able to outdo Michael if they were going to play tricks. He still hadn't figured out why Michael was no longer against him. Matthew had always been a direct person who wasn't fond of speculation. Ding! The elevator doors opened, but Bessy did not exit the elevator. She thought she might have heard him wrongly and said,
Can you repeat that?
Her tone was a little off. Matthew took a while before he repeated it. Bessy did not respond. She simply looked out of the elevator and ended the call. Then, she pulled her earpiece out. Most people were attending the closing ceremony, so not many people were around outside. Michael's car was parked by the roadside with the windows open. He got out of the car when he saw her. Michael knew Bessy very well and could tell something was amiss when he looked at her expression. Her eyes were oddly cold and clear. Michael reflected on himself first, and when he felt that he hadn't done anything wrong, he asked apprehensively,
Something went wrong at the competition? But I heard that you guys did very well.
He looked up at the 5 flags hanging off the building.
Just look at that.
Bessy folded her arms and asked with a strange expression, What did you say to Matthew? Michael narrowed his eyes. He thought hard about his conversation with Matthew.
You didn't come clean with Matthew about helping him behind his back?
Michael furrowed his brows.
Then how would he let you off so easily?
After all, even Matthew's savior, Daniel, had not managed to persuade him. Michael had felt that only Hacker B could convince Matthew. No one else. His judgment had never been wrong. That was why he had decided to lay out the cards before him. Now Bessy was saying that she hadn't actually made it clear to him. Bessy felt like this was getting increasingly confusing. You can deal with him. I'm going to look for my uncle. They were returning to the U.S. tomorrow afternoon. There were still lots of interviews and the handover ceremony in March to prepare for. Michael could guess that Bessy had a lot on her mind.
I'll take you there right now.
He didn't dare to say anything more. He quietly drove to Zeke's filming location. Zeke was in a major film with several scenes as the lead character. He usually had a huge part in his films, and this was the only day he even had some time to spare. James was returning with Bessy the next day, so he was here today to see Zeke as well. When she arrived, James and Tucker had just gotten there. They were waiting for her by the road. Not many people in Austria knew Zeke and Bessy. They didn't have anything to hide.
Michael is here too?
James said a casual hello to Michael first. Tucker greeted Michael too. Only Zeke and Jack weren't acting or feeling so natural. Michael, on the other hand, politely greeted James as Sir and then addressed Zeke as Mr. Miller. Zeke looked at Michael quietly. He and Michael were considered to be of the same generation. After he found out that the Michael that James had been referring to was Michael Clark, he wasn't too optimistic about it. After all, he was known to be something of a playboy, especially because the Flake family were in touch with the fourth son, so Zeke knew about Sherry's feelings towards Michael. Sherry was a part of the 129, too. Although Michael seemed rather calm and a little expressionless as he addressed him, he did seem quite sincere. Zeke was a little stunned. Someone who could make Michael seem so sincere. It didn't seem like things between Michael and Bessy were a game. Zeke felt much better. He nodded towards Michael in acknowledgement and then asked Bessy,
"Bessy, how's the competition?"
They weren't involved in the academic field in Austria, and so they didn't know about the huge news that had rocked the research institute. Bessy wasn't in the mood for this, as she was so caught up in Matthew's business. She simply said, "It was all right."
"That's good."
Zeke took them around the place and got Bessy to take a few more photos. He knew that Bessy always had a thing for ancient architecture. He turned to James and asked,
"Your granduncle isn't here today?" "No, he has something to do. It'll take a while."
James took another look at the time. Bessy handed her cell phone to Michael and got him to take the photos instead. She put on the hood of the windbreaker and followed behind them. Michael took photos of every spot around the place. When he was done, he bade farewell to James and the rest so he could return to settling Matthew's matters.
"Michael isn't joining us for food?"
James was a little surprised to see Michael's car was driving out. Bessy saw the post that Dean Soup had made about their achievement. She reposted it on her Twitter. There were over 10 likes in a few moments. She logged out of her account and said, "He's not hungry."
"Really?"
James did not quite believe her. They entered a private room in the restaurant. Once they were seated, Jack turned to Tucker.
"Tucker, you were too rash that day."
"About what?" Bessy looked up. Jack hurriedly explained.
"Brandon found that Tucker was rather gifted and wanted to keep him around. He could also take the chance to interact with Miss Hall, but Tucker rejected him right away."
The rejection wasn't too bad, since Jack wasn't keen on them keeping in contact. But Tucker had been too harsh towards Miss Hall. He was as impulsive as Bessy. Jack was worried about Tucker's interpersonal skills.
"But I heard that Miss Hall is a hacker."
Jack furrowed his brows and turned to James, then trailed off. Zeke looked at James as he tapped his fingers against the table.
"James, it's best if we have less interaction with the Hall family in the future. We'll just be respectful towards Great Uncle, but leave the rest out."
James nodded.
"All right."
Besides his uncle, he didn't like anyone else anyway. At the Hall family residence, the eldest son of the Hall family was on the first floor as Clarence hurried in.
"You're not joining Brandon and James for dinner? Almost everyone in the Hall family is present,"
he asked politely.
"It's fine."
The eldest son looked at his watch and then shook his head.
"My brother is coming back today. I'll wait for him."
He was referring to Emmanuel. Emmanuel usually only came back during the beginning of the year. In fact, he didn't even make a point to come back every year. Each time he was back, everyone in the Hall family got busy. Clarence understood the eldest son and nodded. Meanwhile, the other managers were rather keen on seeing Emmanuel. As for Carrie, she had never revealed her face this whole time. She'd always been proud, and the only person she bothered about was Emmanuel. Episode 425. Joined the Hacker Alliance. In the end, Clarence only took the chief steward along. As they left, one of the managers asked the eldest son of the Hall family,
"Lionel, would your father be unhappy?" "No, we can wait for my brother to return."
The oldest son wasn't as capable as Emmanuel, but he wasn't a shallow man either. He knew what was important and what wasn't.
"The most important thing now is the smart service system in the World Poker Tour."
Although Emmanuel was the most outstanding person in the Hall family, he had no rivalry with the eldest son at all. Emmanuel had always been working in the World Poker Tour and never had anything against the Hall family. As for the self-proclaimed relatives of the Miller family, he had gotten someone to investigate their background in Evanston. The four most powerful families in Evanston weren't even big shots in Austria. Not to mention the Miller family, whose name barely meant anything. Brandon had always been concerned about his sister's children because he had been on good terms with her, but the eldest son had no relation to them, so he couldn't even be bothered to act like he cared. A few of the others nodded.
Will your brother bring us good news this time?
The bulk of the World Poker Tour's business was in America. Although they had four of the most powerful families of Evanston with them, the Hall family surely wasn't afraid of the World Poker Tour. But the power structure in Austria was rather complicated. Emmanuel had been in the World Poker Tour for many years and had helped the Hall family iron out conflicts. The Hall family slowly learned that the World Poker Tour was actually rather powerful in Austria, but they were not exactly sure where the power came from. This was part of the reason why the Hall family members were afraid of Emmanuel.
I don't know. My brother mentioned during the New Year that he isn't in charge of the smart service system.
The eldest son narrowed his eyes.
This time, it might not be confirmed, too.
One of the members found it strange.
Emmanuel has been back a lot this year.
He hardly ever returned in the past. Brandon got into the car. His expression was the same. He simply glanced at Clarence and asked,
Emmanuel is back today? I confirmed that with him over the phone.
Clarence turned to Brandon.
President, would you like to wait for Emmanuel to return so you can speak to him?
Emmanuel had always had a mind of his own. He was mostly the loner of the Hall family. Ever since he wrote a program at 9 years old, he never had to ask the Hall family for a single cent. Brandon had planned to groom him to be a hacker, but he and Emmanuel weren't quite on the same side. He had no choice but to give it up. Even so, Emmanuel was still a rather important figure to Brandon and the Hall family. Brandon shook his head.
I'll make it when I'm back.
With that, he closed his eyes. Clarence didn't continue as he drove them to the restaurant. Zeke and James didn't have to wait long in the private room. The moment Brandon arrived, he casually mentioned that Emmanuel was going to be back today.
So my second cousin is returning.
James was not really interested in the other Miller family members, but he turned to explain to Bessy anyway.
He's an outstanding programmer.
Oh, Bessy casually nodded and continued chatting with her neighbor on her cell phone.
Neighbor. You're in Austria? Your brother said so.
Bessy turned to look at Tucker, who was talking to Brandon. She replied, Then added, attending an academic event. The neighbor had mixed feelings about her reply and took a while to get back to her. A while later, he asked,
When are you coming back?
Bessy said, Tomorrow. The neighbor replied,
I'm returning tomorrow too. Wait for me at the baggage area. Get him to help me get my ticket changed.
This wasn't a big problem. Bessy hadn't planned to leave with her teammates from school anyway. Both Michael and Marvin knew Emmanuel, but James and Jack did not. Bessy said, See you at the airport. Bessy guessed that Emmanuel probably had something to say to her, so she agreed. Clarence and a senior member of the Hall family were standing behind Brandon. Clarence was a little uncomfortable with Bessy's attitude. She seemed to share some traits with Emmanuel. Meanwhile, it was the Hall family senior member who furrowed his brows.
You're returning tomorrow, not staying for a few more days?
Brandon was hoping for James to stay one more day at least.
Tucker has to attend school in 2 days.
James glanced at Tucker.
All right, then.
Brandon felt that it was a pity, but couldn't say more.
Your second cousin is returning tomorrow, too. I've been thinking that you guys could meet each other at the airport, since there won't be other opportunities."
Only after the meal did Brandon get up to speak to Zeke.
"We really hope that James and the rest can return home to visit the cemetery. My parents loved my youngest sister the most. They would be so comforted up in heaven if they saw the three of them."
James did not say anything. He looked to Zeke and waited for his decision. Zeke looked towards Brandon. He hadn't expected Brandon to bring up visiting the cemetery. He actually didn't want James to have too much to do with the Hall family. It was obvious what sort of person James was, while the Hall family obviously wasn't just an ordinary household in Austria. But Zeke hadn't expected Brandon to suggest this.
"Mr. Miller, don't worry. It's just for James and the children to pay their respects,"
Brandon added when he saw that Zeke was not fully on board with the idea. Since Brandon had already put it this way, it was hard for Zeke to say no.
"We can talk about this in detail the next time."
There was a trace of delight on Brandon's face. The senior member behind Brandon frowned as he looked at Zeke and everyone else. This Miller family was really thinking too highly of themselves. Brandon, Zeke, and James took the lead, while Tucker, Bessy, and the manager trailed behind them. The manager was talking to Bessy about some things regarding the Austria Association.
"Tucker."
The senior member slowed down and bowed slightly to Tucker as a form of apology.
"About Bessy the last time. I hope you don't take it to heart. Bessy."
He was extremely polite as he went on with a smile.
"She joined the Hacker Alliance 2 years back. So, she's a bit of a loner and has her attitude."
Episode 426. Meeting at the Airport. The Hall family was naturally protective. Emmanuel and Carrie had the highest statuses in the family. The Hall family couldn't understand Emmanuel's high position. However, everyone knew that he was able to join the Hacker Alliance at 20 years old. And even though he was pulled in by someone else, the fact that he was accepted meant that he must be very good. In this situation, Tucker and James's attitude towards the Hall family and Carrie made the Hall family members unhappy. Finishing his words, the Hall family's chief butler lifted his head. He looked at Tucker's and the others' expressions. Zeke's manager's expression changed slightly.
"Hacker Alliance?"
He had heard Mr. Rand mention something called the Hacker Alliance previously, but he didn't know much about these top hackers and treated them like legends. Mr. Rand only mentioned the Hacker Alliance and confirmed its existence. But now, what Mr. Rand heard was a rumor. However, the chief steward actually said that Miss Miller joined the Hacker Alliance. Unsurprisingly, the manager was shocked. The manager couldn't hide his emotions, and the Hall family's chief steward realized what he was thinking. The chief butler had expected this reaction. He chuckled and stopped speaking. Instead, he froze after seeing Bessy and Tucker's reactions. He couldn't tell what Tucker was thinking. Bessy was waiting for a message on her phone. She always had several things on her mind at the same time. Hearing the chief steward's words, her expression remained calm as she said, "Excuse me?" The chief butler paused and subconsciously took a step back. Bessy turned her gaze to her phone and walked forward calmly. Behind her, the chief steward clenched his fists tightly. How could a 20-year-old lady have such sharp eyes? Looking at Bessy's back, the chief steward thought he might have misunderstood the situation. Brandon was about to head off to meet Emmanuel and did not chat for long with James and the rest. After a group of people had left, the manager looked at Zeke to clarify about Miss Miller.
"It will be good if Tucker has a relationship with Miss Miller. The Miller family is not simple."
Zeke made a good decision by not allowing them to have much contact with the Miller family.
Hacker Alliance?
Jack turned to the manager for more information. He asked doubtfully,
Is this Hacker Alliance similar to Black Hat?
The manager hesitated before replying. Their system must be different. He only knew that the Hacker Alliance was powerful. As he wasn't a hacker and didn't understand much about programming, the Hacker Alliance consists of a group of top hackers. Bessy put her phone in her pocket and replied, It's a dark network dedicated to disrupting international organizations. Anyone can enter the Hacker Alliance as long as they're qualified. Those who make it in can be considered one of the top 200 hackers in the world. Marvin's car stopped as she finished her sentence. Bessy waved her hand and said, We'll leave at 3 a.m. Their location was quite a distance from the airport, and their flight was at 10:30 a.m. the next day. Since they had visited James, they would have to leave earlier. Zeke waited for Bessy to leave before turning back. The manager then said, Wow, top 200 hackers in the world. There were so many hackers in the world. To be placed in the top 200 was extraordinary. Even Zeke nodded in agreement. James was naive and didn't think much about Bessy. How did Bessy know? He asked Zeke. Zeke was speechless. The manager had also wondered about this. Yes, she also had a book from the Hacker Alliance. Does she know someone in the organization? They exchanged glances, but didn't speak further. At 3 a.m. the next morning, Christopher drove over to pick up James and the rest. Marvin drove another car behind him. They had to pass through the border when they traveled at night. Each car had to stop for checks before proceeding. When the border guards saw Christopher and Marvin's cars, they immediately let them go without checking the passengers. The journey was smooth. They reached Austria's airport at 8 a.m. Brandon and James's cousin hadn't gotten there yet. Michael. James looked at Michael. You go ahead if you're busy, I can wait here. Since he got out of the car, Michael had been busy on his phone. Michael looked at Bessy. Bessy tucked her black and white checkered scarf into her jacket and did not say anything. All right. Michael smiled. I'll go ahead. See you later. He had some things to take care of. The situation regarding Matthew. He also had to speak to General Taylor, who was guarding the airport. Go, James said while waving his hands. It's okay. Christopher said goodbye to James and Bessy before leaving with Michael. Marvin followed behind Bessy. James, why haven't they gotten here yet? Zeke had to work today and couldn't send James off. He sent his manager instead. I'm not sure. James shook his head. Uncle said they left early. They waited for 20 minutes before seeing the chief butler and Clarence carrying the luggage. There was a long line at the border. Clarence put down the luggage and stretched his back. Sorry to keep you waiting. Brandon and Emmanuel will be here soon. They ran into a friend and had a quick chat. James waved his hand to show that it was fine. He paused and asked, What border? You might not know since this is your first time in Austria. It's the place where cars lined up for checks at the border entrance. Everyone knows about this and the inspection is rigorous. The chief butler explained to James. James didn't recall any checks on the way. Really? Jack remembered and said, There was a place we stopped for a minute, but we did not get inspected. How is that possible? The chief steward glanced at them, wanting to speak further, but was stopped by Clarence. Clarence was Brandon's most trusted aide. The chief butler instantly stopped talking to James and the others. Clarence smiled while looking at James and the rest of the group. Stretching his back, he said, I came earlier to let you know that Emmanuel's personality is very cold. It's similar to Miss Miller's. I hope you can be understanding if he gives you the cold shoulder. James didn't think that anyone could be as cold as Bessy. He smiled and said, I've always wondered where Bessy's personality came from. It turns out to be her second cousin. Clarence laughed.
Miss Miller's personality is definitely similar to Emmanuel's.
He slightly regretted saying this. One studied computer while the other studied programming. After a few minutes, Brandon appeared at the entrance with a man wearing glasses. He was about 30 years old, and they could tell that he was cold and meticulous. It was Emmanuel. He was walking behind Brandon while looking at his phone. He seemed to be chatting with someone.
Brandon, Emmanuel.
Seeing Emmanuel, the chief butler's expression quickly changed to a welcoming and respectful one. Brandon introduced Emmanuel to James.
James, this is Emmanuel.
He looked at Emmanuel.
This is your older cousin, James.
Brandon's voice was moderate. Even though Bessy was chatting, she heard a familiar name. She lifted her head and pulled her scarf down. She saw Emmanuel's face. Emmanuel was cold as usual. He looked at Bessy just as she turned. Bessy was speechless. Emmanuel was also speechless. James and Brandon stood between them. Seeing Emmanuel's expression when he looked at Bessy, he said,
Emmanuel, this is your niece. Her name is...
Emmanuel lightly said,
Bessy. I know.
Episode 427. Bessy is World Poker Tour's Poppy? Emmanuel looked at Bessy and they remained silent. Marvin remembered Emmanuel. He remained calm and greeted him.
Hello, Mr. Cheatham. It turns out that Miss Miller was waiting for you.
Emmanuel nodded. James, Brandon, and the others noticed something wrong between Bessy and Emmanuel. Brandon turned to ask,
Bessy, do you two know each other? Yes.
Emmanuel's mind was all over the place and his eyes drifted slightly. He knew Bessy since she was about 9 years old. She was young, but extremely intelligent. Emmanuel was exceptionally warm towards her, and they had a close teacher-student relationship. Hence, Bessy naturally called him uncle. Emmanuel never expected Bessy to be his biological niece. His mind was blank, and it took him a while to return to his senses. James saw Emmanuel's frustration. He turned to ask Bessy,
How do you two know each other?
Emmanuel moved to be closer to Bertha back then. James and Grace had divorced, so he rarely came back to visit. Emmanuel was also low-key, so it was natural that the two had never met. Bessy looked up at the sky and said coldly, He was my neighbor.
Neighbor?
Emmanuel first greeted James, then looked at her. Bessy removed her scarf as she noticed Zeke's manager, Jack, and Clarence's gazes turned to her. Let's talk when we're inside. She looked at the entrance. There must be a reason why Emmanuel approached her, and it was likely due to the World Poker Tour. Emmanuel nodded as his expression warmed up. He greeted Brandon and the others before walking off with her.
Do you want to go back and take a look?
No, Bessy rejected swiftly.
Is this still something to do with your major?
Emmanuel was disappointed.
This is a job.
Emmanuel was speechless. The two walked further and seemed very familiar as they chatted. The others could tell that they had known each other for a long time. It was the opposite of what Clarence said previously. Emmanuel was actually quite warm and enthusiastic. Behind them, Jack and the manager exchanged glances. The manager asked,
Jack, Bessy is...
They both knew that the Hall family wasn't simple, especially when they mentioned that Bessy joined the Hacker Alliance. From Brandon's words, Emmanuel had a high status in the Hall family, and even the Hall family's lady couldn't match up. But, seeing Bessy and Emmanuel, Jack and the manager and even Clarence were shocked as they looked in Emmanuel's direction. Only Marvin was calm. He held the suitcase with one hand and said to James and Tucker,
Mr. Miller, I have to go. Mr. Cheatham and Miss Miller can take a long time when they start talking.
James nodded.
What about Michael?
Michael hadn't arrived yet. Marvin shook his head and said,
Don't worry about him.
Michael would likely walk through the internal passage. He had nothing to worry about. He left after James, Brandon, and the others said their goodbyes. Behind them, Clarence and the chief steward still had not come to their senses, especially the chief steward. Clarence looked at Brandon and asked,
Brandon, Miss Miller was the friend Emmanuel was talking about, right?
Yesterday, Emmanuel said that he had a friend waiting for him at the airport. Emmanuel only considered a few people to be his friend. They were mostly from the World Poker Tour. Brandon continued to look in Emmanuel's direction. He squinted as he recalled something. Emmanuel's description of Bessy. After a long while, he finally regained his senses.
It must be her.
The Hall family stood at the airport for a while before leaving. The chief steward couldn't resist and asked Clarence.
It seemed like Miss Miller and Emmanuel were very close.
Emmanuel had never talked to Brandon about it. Most importantly, how could Emmanuel's friends be ordinary? At 10:11 a.m., everyone had boarded the plane. Bessy and Emmanuel sat on the right side, and Michael calmly rushed in. Seeing Emmanuel and Bessy, he stopped by the door. Marvin sat on a seat beside the door. He hadn't slept well in the last few days and was already wearing an eye mask. Sensing Michael, he pulled down his eye mask.
Michael.
He lifted his head to look at Michael and explained,
Mr. Cheatham is Miss Miller's uncle.
He thought about it again and said,
Biological uncle.
Michael stopped. He knew about the Hall family, but since Bessy didn't pay attention to that, he didn't investigate the Miller family further out of respect. Emmanuel was Bessy's uncle, and Michael realized he had the same personality as her. He looked at Emmanuel and took a seat behind Marvin in the same row as Bessy. The plane landed in Evanston Airport at 11 p.m. Brandon, who was in Austria, called Emmanuel when he turned on his phone.
Emmanuel.
Brandon stood by the window of the living room, looking at the lights outside the manor.
Bessy must be the World Poker Tour's Poppy, right?
Episode 428. There's still an apprenticeship banquet.
Bessy must be Poppy from the World Poker Tour, right?
Brandon didn't have many connections from the people from the World Poker Tour, but he knew a lot about Poppy. The reason why he knew about her wasn't just because of her reputation in the software development field, but also because Emmanuel had spoken about her previously. He had always wanted to invite her into the Hacker Alliance. Brandon wasn't familiar with Emmanuel's friends. However, Bessy's age matched the person that he had described to Brandon. They should have the same age as well. When Brandon extended the invitation to Poppy through Emmanuel, he found out that she was less than 20 years old. It was rare for someone to be so skilled at this age. So, Brandon wanted to recruit her. But she rejected the offer. When he saw Emmanuel talking with Bessy today, Brandon was reminded of it. Her age, character, the environment she grew up in. Her experiences were almost identical to Poppy's. Brandon remembered it all. On the other side of the phone, Emmanuel was holding onto his laptop and phone as he glanced at Bessy. He then said without changing his expression,
Every core member of 28 knows about it. Why are you asking now?
Brandon was standing next to the mirror. When he heard what Emmanuel said, he stumbled and asked,
I thought her major was in nuclear engineering. Her grandfather was one of the pioneers of the nuclear engineering field in this country. Why is it strange for her to major in it?
Emmanuel continued calmly. Claudius Wilson was so famous that he was written into history. He was well known in the physics field. Emmanuel knew all about it.
Was he that famous?
Brandon was shocked as he never knew about it.
2 days ago, I met up with all the young people around me and mentored them.
Don't even think about it. Emmanuel frowned. He knew what Brandon was leading up to. She's focused on school right now and doesn't care about the World Poker Tour. Furthermore, you could never win against her. As Emmanuel spoke, he continued to look at Bessy. You can access the login to the websites on the domestic browser to check it out. It's up. Take a look at a few websites? What did this mean? Brandon looked at his phone and started to browse the web. The notifications from the browsers were about how Bessy's team had gotten first place in Austria. We have won first place in the most advanced category of the ICNE competition. America can be regarded as world-class again after 40 years. There was an excitement the words couldn't describe. Everyone knew about the history of the physics field. Hence, everyone was elated when they saw the notification. Brandon clicked on the link and saw a picture of Bessy with her team at the entrance to the Austria Research Institute. The news wasn't just about the team. Everyone who had internet access was elated. The other faculties that studied in similar fields in other universities were celebrating too. Brandon was shocked. He knew that the competition that Bessy took part in was challenging, but he didn't expect that it would be on such a high level. Behind Brandon, Lionel and Carrie were still awake. Dad, what did Uncle say back? Carrie asked as she put down her teacup and looked towards her father. Lionel checked his phone. Then he shook his head and replied, My brother hasn't replied. He frowned and summoned the chief butler to ask him about what happened at the airport that day. Emmanuel knew Miss Miller. The chief butler didn't care about Bessy previously and only remembered James. Hence, he couldn't recall much about the rest.
He knew her?
Lionel exclaimed.
How?
Dad, you guys can continue with the conversation. I'm going to head upstairs now. Carrie noticed that there wasn't any information about Emmanuel and lost interest. So, she headed upstairs and wanted to think of a solution by herself. I'll contact Uncle by myself. Emmanuel never had a good relationship with the rest of the Miller family, but he still kept in contact with Carrie. After he saw Carrie going upstairs, Lionel stood up as well, concerned with the ownership of the World Poker Tour. He said, Wait for me. The chief butler asked, Lionel, about Miss Miller. I'm going to head upstairs. I want to see if she can get a hold of her uncle. The eldest son shook his head. He was at a loss on how to settle things with Emmanuel. When Emmanuel left, he said that he would discuss the matter with the person in charge today, but he didn't receive any updates. Lionel was anxious about getting ownership to gain more market share. Hence, he couldn't pay much attention to James and Bessy. He hurriedly followed Carrie. The chief butler was dying to say something.
Sir?
The helper saw that the chief butler was motionless and called out,
It's nothing.
The chief butler pouted. He stepped aside when he felt that the relationship between Emmanuel and Bessy wasn't what it seemed to be. In his time with the family, he had never seen Emmanuel talk so much. It was just that Lionel wasn't interested in the topic anymore. Furthermore, the chief butler wasn't sure about his intuition anyway. In the capital, Bessy and Michael had arrived at the Highline Apartments. Joshua and Rosemary were there too. They had been notified about their win in Austria.
Are you finally going to rest for a couple of days?
Joshua asked as he looked at Bessy. Bessy paused for a moment.
What's the matter?
Asked Joshua as he noticed her expression. Michael coughed and answered, There's still an apprenticeship banquet. Episode 429, The White Family's Successor. Michael finished his sentence and turned around.
It might not be counted as an apprenticeship banquet. It's more of a takeover ceremony.
With Mr. Grint, it could be considered an apprenticeship banquet. However, it wasn't the same with Principal White.
Takeover ceremony?
Joshua frowned and was slightly worried. Bessy had been very busy for the past 6 months, and some red streaks could be seen in her eyes. Thus, the first thing he asked Bessy was if she could rest now. Rosemary also lifted her head.
Will it be troublesome?
During these past 6 months, she hadn't seen Bessy take a break. Although she was often called a workaholic, she had never seen someone as resilient as Bessy. Bessy took off her jacket and heard the conversation between Rosemary and Joshua. It's just a takeover ceremony. It's not troublesome. It won't take too much time. We will still be busy with the experiments. I think it's going to be on the 1st or 2nd of March. The specific date and time were still to be determined by Principal White. Joshua nodded and looked at her.
Don't tire yourself out.
Yes. Before she could speak further, her phone rang. It was a call from Northwestern University's laboratory. She picked it up as she headed upstairs. It was Elijah who called. He had just reached the laboratory. The semester had started at Northwestern University and the laboratory was very crowded.
Assistant.
Elijah took 2 steps forward. He was recovering from his excitement these past few days.
Come over. A lot of professors and academians are looking for you.
Bessy pressed her temples. She opened the door and said, "Okay, I'll come right over." She hung up the call and checked her messages. Then she sent a message to Principal White. The ceremony can be simple. It doesn't have to be too troublesome. Principal White was in the White family's conference room when he received her message. He was also waiting for Bessy to return before convening the White family's representatives.
I've gathered you all here to announce something.
Principal White did not reply to Bessy's message. With his hands pressed against the table, he said,
I have chosen the successor for the Research Institute. We will hold the handover ceremony on March 1st.
This sentence was like a bomb to the White family. The White family's headquarters and the Research Institute were on the same level. Principal White was the White family and Research Institute's sole successor. He was getting old, and the White family had been looking for a successor without much success. However, there must be at least a test for the successor, right? He or she would have been voted in by the White family's representatives, right? And that person must at least achieve 80% of the votes to pass, right? After all, this involved the interests of the White family members. How could this be decided so easily? Would the successor's test be conducted immediately?
Mr. White!
The elderly man sitting on his left stood up and looked at him. He asked respectfully,
Is the successor Kenneth?
They couldn't think of anyone else but him. Hearing the elderly man's words, the White family's representatives calmed down. It would make sense if it was Kenneth. Kenneth was outstanding for his generation, and he was currently learning how to manage the White family. Most importantly, he was part of the White family.
No, he's not the successor.
Principal White stood up straight and looked at everyone in the room.
I will get the butler to make the arrangements for the ceremony.
Everyone's expressions paled after hearing that.
Mr. White!
Principal White only came to notify them and not seek any opinion. As the head of the White family and the Research Institute, everyone had to listen to him. He left immediately after finishing what he had to say. Norman followed behind him.
Mr. White, I will begin to notify the family members. Yes, go and send the letters under my name,
Principal White ordered. The two were calm, but those behind them weren't. They exchanged glances.
The successor is not a member of the White family? What is Mr. White thinking?
No one agreed with this decision. A middle-aged man slammed his hands on the table.
No way! How can we give the Research Institute to an outsider? Will the Research Institute still belong to the White family then?
For the past decades, the White family had shaped the Research Institute. They weren't willing to let it go to an outsider. But it was difficult to change Principal White's decision. After all, Principal White held all the power.
Even Kenneth can't match up to his requirements. Who else could it be? And for it to be an outsider?
Those at the table were discussing while some took out their cell phones.
Does Kenneth know? I'm going to ask him.
He took out his phone and called Kenneth. The rest looked at him silently, with a solemn expression. The call was picked up quickly. The representative explained the situation to Kenneth.
Kenneth, could you persuade Mr. White to rethink his decision? You know what happened at the Research Institute, and its status has recently been raised in Austria. How can we choose a successor so casually?
Not to mention, they didn't know if the outsider could manage the Research Institute well, and whether they had been the best interest of the Research Institute. Kenneth paused before replying.
I understand. No one can change what he has decided.
Could Mr. White be so casual? Kenneth narrowed his eyes. He went to Chicago in hopes to become the successor. He stayed there for 3 years while waiting. It was impossible that Mr. White made such a decision sloppily. Kenneth looked out. His eyes were deep as he hung up the call. The family members remaining in the conference hall exchanged glances. Their expressions made it clear that these two matters were about to blow up in Evanston. Not only because Mr. White had a successor, but because his successor wasn't a member of the White family. Would Evanston's pattern change soon? Would this successor fit into the White family? Was he capable? Could he manage the matters at the Research Institute and the White family? Could they keep up to speed with the White family? Could they create as many opportunities as Mr. White? Besides these questions, the White family representatives were most curious about who exactly was the successor chosen by Mr. White. The White family weren't the only ones having doubts about this issue. Even Rosemary was hesitant. Michael lazed on the sofa with a cup of tea in his hands. Bessy came down holding a thick folder of documents. Michael finished his tea and looked up.
Are you going to school?
Yes, Bessy replied. She didn't want to go, but it was inappropriate to leave Elijah and the rest to do the research. I might be back late. Michael nodded. He stood up while Marvin gave him the car keys. The two said goodbye to Joshua and Rosemary before leaving. Seeing them leave, Rosemary sat opposite Joshua and called to Marvin.
Marvin, wait!
Marvin immediately stopped beside the window and looked at her.
Miss Clark?
Rosemary looked at him with her eyebrows raised.
Do you know what the handover ceremony is about? Handover ceremony?
Marvin didn't overhear Michael and Bessy's conversation earlier. Rosemary explained.
Bessy said it will be simple.
Rosemary did not think that Bessy's simple was truly simple. Although Marvin did not say anything, Rosemary could see through his expressions. She usually could find something out. But this time, Rosemary miscalculated, since even Marvin did not know what was going on. On the contrary, Joshua seemed to be lost in his thoughts. Previously, Michael had asked if his heart was in good condition. He thought that it might be due to Bessy's 100% performance at the laboratory. But seeing this, could it be due to this takeover ceremony? His phone rang as he was deep in thought. Joshua looked at the caller ID.
The White family? Why are they calling me at this hour?
His eyebrow raised. He picked it up immediately. They said a few sentences. After 1 minute of conversation, Joshua's back straightened and his eyes widened. Beside him, Rosemary asked, "What's the matter?" Episode 430. Regrets. Rosemary saw Joshua's expression.
I've heard that the person they chose to take over the White family and Research Institute isn't Kenneth. I'm not waiting for Bessy to get back. I'll head off first,
Joshua said as he got off the stool. Rosemary left her cup on the table. She frowned when she saw Joshua leave and asked, "How is Kenneth not the one taking over the White family and the Research Institute?" Kenneth was famous in the Evanston social circle. Few could compare to him in the White family. He would be the first person people thought of when they talked about the successor to the White family and the Research Institute. No wonder Joshua had such a huge reaction. Finding out who was taking over the Research Institute was a big deal.
There isn't any news from the White family. They're going to host a dinner party at the beginning of next month.
Joshua said with a sigh.
It's too rushed.
He could understand what was happening. As soon as Joshua left, Rosemary stood up and fixed her coat. Marvin was standing behind Rosemary, who was holding on to the vase. He froze as he recalled seeing Principal White at the Chicago school doctor's office. He shook his head violently to erase that thought. At the Northwestern University Laboratory in Basement 3, President Flores of Northwestern University, the manager of the laboratory, Dr. Weatherby, President Soup, and Mr. Rostron were talking.
Is Bessy coming over?
President Flores asked Elijah. Elijah nodded as he looked at his phone. Then he replied,
We have about half an hour before she gets here. Get everything ready then,
President Flores said as he started to make some calls while heading out. They knew that Bessy hated to answer the repetitive questions of the press. Since Elijah and Gary weren't good at it either, that job was given to Kai and Kara. The rest were waiting for Bessy to get to the laboratory. Within half an hour, Michael's car had arrived. As Bessy got out of the car, she saw President Flores with everyone else. As she approached them, fireworks were set off. Boom! Boom! She was speechless, one after another. Bessy hated the noise and immediately covered her ears. As she got closer to President Flores, she noticed that Mr. Rostron and Dr. Weatherby were focused on the fireworks with red eyes. She slowed her pace. As she reached them, she uncovered her ears and started to count the number of fireworks. There were a total of 40 fireworks.
You're the greatest contributor to the Research Institute,
President Flores said as he patted Bessy's shoulder. Initially, he wanted Bessy to join Northwestern University because he wanted to get more resources for the university. He even asked the dean of the mathematics department to ask her to change her major. Thank God she stood her ground and continued with computer science and nuclear engineering. Otherwise, the hard work of all the researchers in the country would be wasted. Even the Research Institute in Austria wouldn't have expected that the rise of the field in this country was because of a team made up of such young members.
Come, let's head in. A few professors are waiting for you in Basement 3,
President Flores said as he ushered Bessy in. Bessy nodded and followed Mr. Rostron. President Flores glanced at the car that Bessy had gotten out of and didn't head in with everyone else. He stayed behind. No one noticed that. Only when everyone entered the building did President Flores walk towards the car. Michael got out of the car.
President Flores,
he greeted. President Flores knew all along that Bessy was Michael's rumored girlfriend, so he wasn't surprised to see him here.
Mr. Clark, I'm sure that you are aware of the reason I am approaching you. It's regarding Bessy. I hope that the tragedy won't repeat itself. We finally have another leader in the Research Institute. I will be responsible for keeping an eye on Director Fielder. If the 4 families interfere again, the other students will react to you guys.
I know, Michael replied with a smile, even though he sounded harsh.
No need for you to remind me.
He was going to support Bessy. President Flores breathed a sigh of relief after hearing his guarantee.
That's great, then.
The Clark family was the most powerful in the capital. With Michael's support, other families would have to reconsider making any plans. Bessy arrived at the laboratory. Before she could put on her protective gear, she was surrounded by the professors. Mr. Rostron saw that and said,
No need for that. We don't have any experiments today. These professors have some questions for you.
After she heard that, Bessy put the protective gear aside.
Mr. Rostron, does the laboratory have 2 official slots for the researcher position?
Dr. Weatherby asked. He was aware of what happened to Elijah in Austria as well. With Bessy and Elijah's accomplishments, they could easily qualify for the researcher role. Mr. Rostron adjusted his glasses as he replied nonchalantly,
"It shouldn't be a problem."
"That's what I thought as well," Dr. Weatherby replied smilingly.
"They could even be third-grade researchers."
Bessy's resume, coupled with her research on nuclear engineering and her contributions to the Research Institute, would easily qualify her to join the Research Institute.
"I have reported this already,"
Mr. Rostron said as he looked at his phone.
"I did it yesterday. We're waiting for the Research Institute to get back to us."
Dr. Weatherby and President Soup stood by after hearing what Mr. Rostron said. Sarah also didn't want to leave even though the laboratory was on a break. She knew that the Research Institute would ask Mr. Rostron to make the announcement today. Sarah smiled as she thought about it while looking at Bessy and Elijah.
"Mr. Rostron, have you nominated Bessy for the researcher position at the Research Institute?"
The other professors asked as they waited for Mr. Rostron to be done. This bunch of esteemed professors would discuss only a few topics: light, electricity, nuclear, and magnetism. But they were more concerned about who Bessy would choose as her mentor.
"Bessy, have you thought about your mentor?"
Mr. Rostron adjusted his glasses again as he looked at her and said,
"Director Fielder had asked me about this as well."
Elijah got away from them and started to write something at his desk. "Elijah, I can see why you left my team. You wanted to join her ICNE competition," Sarah said as she stood next to him. "She'll definitely become a fourth-grade researcher, right? She's only 20. Even Director Fielder wants her."
"What are you getting at?"
Elijah asked. "Elijah, Mr. Rostron will transfer to another laboratory soon, and he doesn't seem to want to bring anyone along. I'll be transferred as well. Why do you treat her so much better than you treat me? Why are you so wary of me? Why did you leave my propulsion competition and join ICNE before telling me?" Sarah asked. She got louder as she spoke, and everyone heard what she said. Everyone looked towards them. In the world of academia, it was important to act a certain way. Sarah looked at Elijah and Bessy and then continued. "Bessy, do you remember who was the one who welcomed you when you first arrived?" Her words silenced everyone. The professors started to look at Bessy and Sarah. The Research Institute wouldn't value someone with talents but with the wrong conduct. God knew what the person would do with the experimental results. They might even leak out classified information for money. Elijah took a deep breath to calm down. He then stared at her and said,
"You tore up the name list when Mr. Rostron asked her to join you in your propulsion system a few months back."
Elijah continued while still looking at her.
"Our field in this country needs to unite. It's the culture for those who have been in the field for a while to teach the younger researchers in the laboratory. I was the one who took care of you before."
Elijah fished out the proposal drafted by Bessy and threw it at Sarah. He then exclaimed,
"Take a look at this proposal. Her specialization was in computer science. She drafted a proposal for us even though you didn't allow her to join the team. Sarah, why else would you get first place?"
Episode 431. Formal Researcher, Deputy Second Level. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, staring at the plan thrown at her by Elijah in a daze. She now regretted hastily spitting her words. Squeezing the plan in her hands, she didn't dare to even read it thoroughly. Looking up, she only saw Elijah's angry and disappointed face, and involuntarily took a step back. Elijah shook off the truth in the first second after Sarah finished speaking. At the same time, a thin layer of cold sweat broke on his back. If he hadn't kept the plan given by Bessy, Sarah's words today would definitely leave a stain on her reputation. This kind of stain wasn't worth mentioning to other people, but its impact would certainly be magnified on Bessy. The assistant still gave me the plan after you tore up her list. She agreed to participate in this competition despite already having the ICNE project. This competition holds no weight to her, but she still put in the effort to write a plan for our team. You only managed to win first place amongst the 3 people because of the points I wrote with her plan. Also, I only left the research team after completing all my work, so it didn't affect any of you. Elijah's voice gradually calmed down at the end. He retracted his gaze and sat back down on the chair before continuing to click on the document. He didn't intend on telling her about this plan at the beginning, but she had completely provoked him today. He didn't believe that she didn't know how important academic reputation was. Since she had said such things in front of everyone today, she shouldn't blame him for ignoring their senior-junior relationship. Seeing their fallout and hearing Elijah's explanation, the group of smart people almost immediately figured out what had happened. Sarah had looked down on the assistant and torn her registration form, but this assistant had still dutifully written a plan for Elijah. The professors frowned at Sarah and then looked away. They continued talking to Mr. Rostron and waited for his phone call. On the other side, Sarah was still rooted to the ground. She finally reached out with trembling hands and opened the plan that Elijah had handed her. Bessy had already completed the full level in the computer science department and naturally wrote a very good plan. It was much longer than the plans Elijah and Sarah wrote, but was not shooting in the dark. The value of her report, that Elijah had noticed within a glance, was naturally seen by Sarah as well. She turned another page with trembling hands. With only one of her arguments, Elijah had managed to turn Sarah's team into the most outstanding one among the last 3 candidates. What if their entire team had followed her plans? Sarah collapsed onto a chair nearby, her eyes staring blankly at the plan. Domestic news had revealed through interviews that Bessy had only taken less than half a year to refresh ICNE's history of average ages, bringing along 3 newbies and a half-hearted person who only entered the ICNE in the last 2 months. She even completed the ICNE projects in such a short time. Bessy was now famous in the physics world. If she had been there, their aviation propellers would also have gotten the achievement of a refreshed history of average age. Most importantly, the presence of Bessy was the biggest shock and biggest certainty for her research project. At the thought of this, Sarah finally knew what she had torn off. Ultimately, time couldn't be turned back, and it wouldn't help to be filled with regrets. This incident with Sarah was just an inconvenience. Bessy wasn't bothered. While listening to Dr. Weatherby and the others, she picked up her phone to see Principal White's response. It was going to be on the 1st of March at 10 a.m. at the White family's house. Principal White originally planned to hold the ceremony in mid-March, but Bessy's performance had exceeded his expectations. Now, this kind of contribution was enough to gain a foothold in the academic world. He couldn't wait any longer. His planning for Bessy as his successor in March had begun half a year ago, and he had already planned the trivial processes. The 1st of March seemed a little rushed to the other White family members, but it wasn't so for Principal White.
Give me the name list. I'll write an invitation and send it to you tonight. Have you notified the Research Institute?
Bessy replied, no, and then continued listening to President Soup and Dr. Weatherby's conversation.
Bessy, Director Fielder sent someone to ask me if you have a teacher in the laboratory.
Dean Soup leaned on the table with joyful eyes.
In fact, it wasn't just him. Many people in the Research Institute couldn't contact you and came to ask me. Before entering the Research Institute, it's best to find a teacher. Your friend Luke already completed an apprenticeship to a similar researcher. You have unlimited potential, so it won't be difficult to get a place in Austria's Research Institute in the future.
Including those old guys in the physics world, there must be many who want to accept you as their student and are contacting you. You must weigh your options carefully.
Speaking of this, he couldn't help but look at her. When he found out she was assigned to Mr. Rostron's laboratory, he thought about the possibility of Mr. Rostron accepting her as his student and thought it was impossible. But after half a year, even the most advanced level researcher in America's Research Institute, Director Fielder, had come to ask about Bessy's teacher. The Research Institute and the White family had their own sections. A fight would surely ensue. With her current achievements, given a few more years, she would fully grow into another legendary Ian Walsh in ICNE. Not only was it a proud thing to have such an apprentice, but it was the teacher's strongest backing, too. Bessy hesitated and tilted her head. I already have a teacher.
Who is it?
Taken aback, Dean Soup frowned.
Did you get taken advantage of?
Bessy was about to reply to him. Not far away, Mr. Rostron's long-awaited phone call finally came. Dean Soup immediately got up, and all of the doctoral professors chatting sporadically also turned to look in Mr. Rostron's direction. They all stared intently at him. Mr. Rostron looked down.
It's the person in charge of the Research Institute.
He quickly answered the phone. The person on the other end reported the results. After about a minute and a half, Mr. Rostron hung up with a slight nod.
How was it, Mr. Rostron? What level?
Seeing that he was silent, they all leaned over. They all knew that Bessy had no problem entering the Research Institute, and only wanted to know which level she had been assigned to.
Mr. Rostron, why aren't you saying anything?
Dr. Weatherby leaned over. Without saying anything, Mr. Rostron just reached out to turn on the computer. After typing for 30 seconds, he handed the report to him. Dr. Weatherby looked down at it. Everyone quickly gathered around. Good news was written on it. Elijah Mayfield, formal researcher at the 3rd level. Bessy Miller, formal researcher at the deputy 2nd level. Episode 432. An Invitation for a Friend. The words weren't big, but they were very clear. The last time Elijah and Bessy reported on the reactor, their rating had already reached the preparatory 4th level researcher of the Research Institute. He was only 27 years old. He reached the senior researcher level several years earlier than the average person. But who knew that the results? He was being promoted to the 3rd level already? Of so many researchers up and down the Research Institute, their average age at the 3rd level was about 40 years old. Except for a few geniuses like Mr. Rostron. They could still accept Elijah's name being on the list, but Bessy's name below was extremely shocking. As a deputy 2nd level researcher, she was 1 level higher than Elijah. The stamp underneath the file belonged to the Research Institute and confirmed that this was real. That was to say, Bessy just entered the Research Institute as a deputy 2nd level researcher. The laboratory was full of accomplished people in the academic world. Before seeing this list, these professors had only expected her to be at the highest, a 3rd level researcher, and didn't expect her to skip straight to the deputy 2nd level researcher. There were still researchers above the deputy 2nd level in the Research Institute, but a 21-year-old as the deputy 2nd level researcher held a different weight. As a 21-year-old deputy 2nd level researcher, as long as there were no deviations in the future, she would have no problem becoming one of the giants in the Research Institute. The noisy laboratory suddenly fell silent.
I remember that Luke was only a deputy 3rd level when he entered the Research Institute.
Someone muttered silently after a long pause. The others exchanged glances. They had heard of Bessy's reputation long ago.
Northwestern University's Bessy Miller. She was really deserving of this reputation. It was no wonder a 21-year-old deputy second-level researcher, a genius named by Austria, caused such ripples throughout the domestic physics world. The group of doctors and professors were silent for a while before continuing to discuss it again. While the others in the laboratory were still excited and worked up, Dean Soup was already frowning. At the side, Elijah also felt like he was floating. Originally, he could only reach the normal 4th-level standards, even with 3 years of struggle. Who knew that in just a few moments, he would have surpassed the 4th level and became a newcomer on the 3rd level. The calmest person in the room was Bessy. She just stood on the side and glanced at the name signed under the good news, Director Fielder. Looking down with lowered eyes, she continued reading the summary given to her by Mr. Rostron. Holding a pen with her thin and desolate fingertips, she replanned what Elijah had yet to draw a conclusion on. Her phone in her pocket vibrated. She took it out to see a message from Rosemary asking her if she was free to go to the Clark family's house tonight. Joshua had been waiting for her since the morning. She had been in the laboratory after New Year's and had yet to visit the Clark family. Michael had ignored Rosemary when she asked him about it and had only asked her to take care of the Clark family's affairs. She could only ask Bessy herself now. Leaning a little on the table and tapping her fingertips on the screen, Bessy pondered for a long time before replying to her. Yes. By 6 p.m., most of the doctoral professors in the laboratory had left, leaving 7 of them still studying Bessy's 5-man project with Mr. Rostron. Bessy gave them all the information and specifics before leaving. Dean Soup, Dr. Weatherby, and Elijah saw her out of the building, while the rest were too immersed in the project and couldn't peel their eyes away. Bessy had already noticed Michael's car parked on the roadside. The air conditioner in the laboratory was already turned on very high, and its proximity to the reactor made it stuffy and hot. She didn't need to wear a scarf when she came out, and didn't even button up her coat. Walking to the last step and waving to the 3 of them, she was about to leave when she suddenly remembered something and turned around. Dr. Weatherby, Dean Soup, Elijah, are you free on the 1st of March? I have something personal going on.
The 1st? I think so.
Northwestern University resumed school from break on March 1st, and Dean Soup was very busy, but he would definitely free up his time for her. Both Elijah and Dr. Weatherby had yet to take any vacation days and could no longer stand the high-intensity work. They were planning to take a vacation, and after hearing Bessy, they planned to take 2 days off at the end of the month.
Bessy, don't tell me you have a project.
Elijah glanced up at her and paused. He had even managed to participate in the top project, ICNE. He was Elijah Mayfield, a man who had sailed past the stormy waves. He felt like he could remain stable whatever project Bessy threw at him. No, but I have a banquet with the teacher I told you about, Bessy said, touching her chin and thinking of how Principal White's invitation cards had yet to arrive. She did the math and realized that she actually had quite a few friends in the circle. Kara, Mary, and the others added up to 10 people. As for Emmanuel and the others, they might die of anger if they knew that she was going to take over the research institute. Of course, not only that, but she had invited Emmanuel for a meal alone because he liked a quiet atmosphere. Even if she was annoyed by such a banquet, much less him. Bessy said goodbye to the 3. She opened the passenger door and got into the car. Inside, the lights were turned on, and Michael was sending a message on his phone with his head lowered. When she got in, he calmly put his phone away. Should I invite my friend? Leaning back, she held her phone and pondered slightly. She never understood how to fit in with the world and had been accustomed to arrogantly doing whatever she wanted. Michael turned the car keys.
Which friend?